Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Medieval Sewing Party with the Creative Contessa. This week, I've got some fun, interesting medieval news to share with you, and I've got a whole bunch of repairs to continue doing and some updates on some underway projects. So as always, we're going to start off with the traditional getting dressed. And of course, as always, I would just like to verify that everyone can hear me before I start talking into the void like some kind of mad woman. Yeah, so just let me know if you all can hear me. I am currently still in Daegu, South Korea, so many of you are probably watching from the Americas in the evening, and it is freshly morning here, and we have a beautiful monsoon day. That unfortunately also means it's rather humid, so if I'm glistening, it's because there's just that much moisture in the air. Audio is okay, fantastic, thank you, Susan. So, let's go ahead and proceed with the getting dressed while we talk about a variety of things. Handsome, aren't you with the boys? Spending time with them, dinner, that kind of thing? And you all may notice back there on the couch, we already have a feline overlord who wants attention by sitting in exactly the spot where I plan to sit to do my sewing. Good morning from Texas. Good evening to you, Tim. Thank you for joining us today. Okay, so as always, I've already started with my linen smock on, and I'm now just putting on my woolen kirtle. And I'm going to be doing the medieval cooking live stream later on in the day, my time, or tomorrow for many of you, in exactly this outfit. So it will be quite a hybrid. It will be quite a hybrid of me cooking in medieval attire, but in a very modern kitchen, using some equipment that is at least medieval adjacent, or if not replicas, then equivalent to the kind of equipment that they had in a medieval kitchen. So I'm very excited about today's medieval cooking party, because I think it's going to be a very interesting experience for everyone, including me, because in preparing for this cooking party, I have absolutely made some very interesting discoveries about which enhanced my already extant knowledge about just how sophisticated medieval food actually was. Apparently, Tommy decided to go away. Sydney, welcome. Lovely to see you, or well, to see you here in the chat this morning. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, so I'm just lacing up my kirtle. Kirtle. This word has at least 15 spellings in 15th century orthography, because, why should we standardize something like spelling when we can approach it as a creative writing exercise? But basically, a kirtle by the 15th century refers pretty much uniquely to this kind of gown that women wear. This is an underlayer, or you might maybe view it as an intermediate layer, some of you. But this was an essential layer that all women wore, of all classes. Even nuns wore kirtles. So we know that this is what's on underneath anything else you might see on the top. This is what's underneath. There used to be a lot of debate in the living history world about what women wore under the various gowns that we saw. But once you start looking for a series of illustrations depicting women in various states of the day, times of the day, kind of following them through their day, then sometimes you can actually get an idea about what it is they're wearing underneath. Fountain of Youth scenes are also a fantastic representation of what various men and women are wearing as layers, because Fountain of Youth scenes always depict people getting undressed to dive into the fountain to attain eternal youth. One of the ironies about a lot of eternal or Fountain of Youth scenes in the 15th century is that the people going into the fountain don't look very much older than the people coming out of the fountain. So, your average illuminator miniaturist apparently decided not to really depict the horrifying details of an aged person. Horrifying is maybe the wrong word, but some of the less visually appealing details of an aged person, so that the difference between the aged person and the young person is not necessarily massive. Yeah, even nuns wear kirtles, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So this is Odele, when you say, could I show you a demonstration, could you be more specific? So this is the kirtle all laced up. It's front lacing. There are some kirtles that lace on the sides. And in Italy, the kirtle is called a camora in northern Italy. It sometimes has lacing in front and on the sides, which for women who are married and probably giving birth and maybe nursing, that gives you the maximum amount of flexibility, because if the laces on the side allow the dress to expand this way, the laces in the front allow it to expand here as well. And so you can understand why there would be side lacing and front lacing in a gown. But what we don't see back lacing. And that's because, yes, you're living in a community in the 15th century. No one lives alone, right? There's always at least one other person in the home with you, if not others. And for the most part, even, lower middle class people had a servant or two. So yes, you could have someone lace you up if there's back lacing, but they just didn't do it. Didn't do it for whatever reason. Can you do a traditional 15th century dance demonstration? Not here. I literally have no space. This room is tiny and it's filled with things. But if you go to my YouTube channel, I have a whole playlist called Medieval Dance. My medieval dance playlist is almost only 15th century dance. So if you want to see what 15th century dance looks like, I have a whole playlist on YouTube, Medieval Dance. Almost like 99% of the dances in that playlist are 15th century. Yeah. Let me see. Tea with Tash, lovely. Thank you for joining us today. Takedo, thank you for joining us. Yeah. Okay, so we're not done yet, though. Of course, my hair is all unkempt, literally unkempt. By the way, if you've ever heard the expression unkempt, kempt is the participle of the Middle English word for combing. So literally something that is unkempt is uncombed. You haven't combed your hair yet. So unkempt hair has not been combed yet. And I have not combed my hair yet. This is just how it looks after taking it out of the braids in which I slept in it, and then after doing a kickboxing workout. So this is my kickboxing workout here. Because I didn't have any ties in it, so the braids just came straight out while I was kickboxing, and this is what it looks like after that kind of workout. Okay, so here is a replica medieval comb. We have the larger tines on one side, the finer tines on the other, and this is also, as I've mentioned before, and some of you have reacted with strange amounts of horror to this, but this is also part of the hair cleaning process in medieval Europe, and actually throughout most of Eurasia, at the very least, if not other parts of the world as well, right? People just couldn't wash their hair every day. It's not convenient. The amount of time it would take using the tools you had available, having wet hair for large parts of the day, very inconvenient. There's no hair dryer, so you just have to wait for your hair to naturally dry. And you would not look particularly well put together if you're wandering around with wet hair that's down all day waiting for it to dry. So dry cleaning methods, though, this comb is very good at removing excess oil, redistributing the natural oil from your scalp. It's good at removing, and I'll say it again, the detritus or detritus from your hair. There's two different pronunciations for that word. Some of you have objected to my pronunciation. And yes, it is detritus in the air, detritus, because there's a lot of particulate matter that is just floating around in the air, and especially in the Middle Ages, because of all the smoke, the fire, the cooking fires that were in open hearths that didn't have chimney pieces. So in any given building, there was pretty smoky, and so there would be a lot of ash and soot just floating around in the air, and that would end up in your hair as well. So here, this comb, this style of comb with these tines, is very good at removing all of that, right? And I particularly make sure that I drag it across my scalp so that it stimulates the blood in the hair follicles in my scalp, and also so that it loosens any of the oils that are just naturally there and grabs them and pulls them down the shaft, right? And yeah, my hair is still damp from hell. It's still damp because it's very humid here this morning. It's monsoon season, so yeah. So people didn't know, people definitely did not used to be dirty. People are still dirty now, actually. If you look at people's shirt collars, you will see that they develop ring around the collar to this day. People were definitely not dirty in the Middle Ages. They bathed, they washed their bodies every day. You don't have to wash your hair with water for it to be clean. That's a modern myth. And that's a myth that, the shampoo and body wash, body care product companies want you to think, that you need their ridiculously chemical laden products in order to stay clean. You really don't. For normal amounts of dirt, you honestly don't even need soap. Water and a washcloth will get it done. No, medieval people washed every day, and they washed their hands at every meal. There was actually a ritual hand washing that happened. They washed their hands after every meal. We know this from the medieval 15th century books of etiquette, for instance, that detail that custom. They talk about the 15th century books of etiquette manuals that are provided, that were written up for servants to help them be better servants. Talk about keeping dishes clean, keeping your space clean and well organized, airing out bedding every day. Laundry was a thing that happened regularly. So no, medieval people were absolutely not dirty. Now, post-industrialization, yeah, people started getting really dirty because suddenly they had no time for that anymore, and they were working in filthy, dirty conditions. And of course, poverty was rampant after the onset of the Industrial Revolution. So people crammed into tight urban spaces that were filthy because of all the pollution from the factories. Yeah, but that's 19th century. That is not the Middle Ages. That is well past the Middle Ages. Medieval people were very clean. There were public bathhouses. Every city had public bathhouses, and people who had means, they had bathtubs, and they could take an occasional bath. How often people of means actually submerge their body fully for a bath, I haven't been able to really get an answer to that. But we know that bathing, whether in a bath, your private bath, in a bathhouse, or just using a basin of water and a sponge or a cloth, was extremely common in the Middle Ages. Everyone did it. No one wanted to be dirty. That's a myth. And I'm not certain who started perpetuating that myth of the dirty Middle Ages or the dirty people in the Middle Ages. But now, roads, yeah, they were muddy as hell. Seriously. Medieval roads were dirty, and there was certainly dust when it was dry. So it's not that there was no dirt or filth in the medieval world. I definitely don't mean to say that. But the people themselves wanted to be clean and took great pains to be clean. Let's see. What did they have for toilet paper? So here's the weird thing. We all think we have to have all these disposable products in order to stay clean. You don't need paper towels. You don't even need toilet paper. You can actually, hear me out, guys. You can actually wash the rags that you use to wipe your bum if you want to. It's only the modern world that we think we have to have a disposable rag. Ancient Romans actually had a sponge on a stick. We're not quite as clear about what medieval people used, or at least I'm not as clear about what medieval people used to clean their bums, and it probably varied wildly across the 1,000 years that is the Middle Ages, and also the entire continent of Europe. So, but in ancient Rome, it was sponge on a stick, and you can wash the sponge. The sponge can even be sterilized, right? So, this idea that you have to have, it's sort of like disposable diapers are one of the greatest menaces to environmental hazards. Whereas a lot of people still use washable diapers. Yes, you can wash a diaper. It doesn't have to be one single use item that won't biodegrade and that produces the most awful microplastics you can imagine. So yeah. To wipe one's bum, one can simply use a rag, and the rag is then washed. You can even boil it to sterilize it. And medieval people knew that boiling sterilized items. They didn't understand why, but they did understand that there were way better outcomes if you boiled things when you wanted them clean than if you didn't boil things. In Sweden, they used wooden spates, like big popsicle sticks. In the Middle Ages, Thomas, really? That's interesting. That's very interesting. Were they disposable, or did they burn them afterwards, or were they single use or multi-use? I'm interested. And also, yeah, how far back does that date, or is it documentable? I'm interested in that as well. Oh, yeah, I mean, Twitchy, for certain, the idea of backwards medieval people actually starts with Petrarca, who's living in the Middle Ages, technically. Right? Um, but yeah, like he viewed his own time as being an age of ash and shadow, or shadow and ash. I forget in which order he said it. So yeah, but I mean, I was talking about the Middle Ages were dirty specifically, not just backwards. I play the recorder, and my favorite thing to play is dance music from the 15th and 18th century. Who are your favorite pop icons from medieval and Baroque times? Oh, well, I mean, goodness, pop icons from the 15th century, Josquin des Prés. I mean, of course, who couldn't love Josquin des Prés? Josquin des Prés, Dufoy. I love Dufoy. Well, you all might pronounce it as Dufay, but it was actually apparently pronounced Dufoy in the 15th century. Dufoy, of course, you know, the Burgundian composers, the sexy rock stars of the Burgundian court. Love them all. Not so much. There's not many musicians. I mean, I do appreciate a good depressing, you know, Renaissance emo music by John Dowland. Um, and you know, Baroque, big Verdi fan. Of course, I'm not certain if that counts as pop music or not. Big Verdi fan. Telemann, love Telemann. Yeah. So now I'm just using the fine tines to just pull through my hair. And the reason my hair looks wet is because it is. It's not greasy, it is wet. It's just very, very moist here. We're in full monsoon. By the way, Han, it's so wonderful to have you back again. I've missed you. Let me see. Usually they were burned. Oh, interesting. So those wooden spates were burned. Carving new ones was a comment. Wait, did you say, oh, carving? You mean whittling? They weren't, were they decorated? Or are you just talking about whittling new ones out of wood? I'm going to assume you meant whittling. Yeah. But that's probably a good idea to burn them. I mean, you know, it's a good idea actually, because it's a bit of a circular economy, right? Then you take this thing that you've used to clean your derriere and then you use it to, you know, create heat. Of course, I'm not certain how I feel about, well, people used to burn manure straight up. So what's the difference between burning manure for cooking, fire, or heat, and burning a wooden spate that you use to wipe your bum? Okay. So people have been asking me about using this comb with curly hair. It works with curly hair. You just have to work very carefully, right? And possibly, depending on your hair type, some olive oil or walnut oil or some whatever the oil would be that would be local to your particular persona's origins, right? But olive oil is a pretty common one. A little bit of olive oil will create some slip in your hair. This is just, my hair is just wet right now. So yeah, you would just, if you have really curly hair, you just have to go bit by bit and start at the bottom, because even for curly hair, they use these combs, as far as we can tell. Currently, I'm in a World of Warcraft hole and wondering if I could recreate some of the costumes you see into historical garments. I mean, that is like, you know, the essence of cosplay. Or is Twitchy, is the concern that some of the costumes are maybe too improbable in terms of physics? I think that's a problem with a lot of the superhero costumes, for instance, especially the ones that women are often um, depicted as wearing, that they defy the laws of physics. It's like you would need to live in a different universe with different rules of physics for that clothing to actually work and stay on your body and be movable. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, T. You know, menstruation is, I think there's a couple of other species that menstruate. There are a couple of other species that menstruate. We are not alone there. But yeah, we do not lick our butts to clean them. And every time I see my cats cleaning their butts, I get so happy that we don't have to do that. Just so very happy. I will say though that my little rescue baby Nabi, who's not here, her mother abandoned her when she was like 5 weeks old, and so she never got that pheromone that really stopped her from being a kitten entirely. And so whenever she goes and uses her litter box, she literally comes running out, meows at me in the most piteous little kitten mew, because she wants me to clean her butt for her, because that's what mommy kitties are supposed to do for baby kitties. I don't do it, in case you're wondering. I make her clean her butt, or I make her brothers clean her butt. At the moment, late 1400s for the Alliance, all the silly hats and Gothic armor. Oh, nice. Nice. I read somewhere that Louis XIV used gold coins, then threw them out to the poor. That sounds apocryphal, but also it could, I mean, that sounds apocryphal. I just can't imagine that being comfortable. uh, yeah. Yeah, I'm not so familiar with pop tunes from the 17th century, I'll be honest. You know, I get less interested in material culture after 1500. Just I just do. At least material culture in the West after 1500. It just starts to feel really soulless to me, and of course the Reformation breaks Europe as far as I'm concerned. So, not that the church didn't need reforming, it did. I'm not debating that, but there was so much horror that came out of the Reformation that it just and basically history after 1500 in my imagining has the medieval gray filter over top of it. Actually, not the Middle Ages are bright and colorful and happy and jolly. Starting in about 1510 or 1520, things start getting really dark in my imaginings. So yeah. Okay, so we're all combed now. Let's see. What do you do with this gold, 3 little gold coins sitting on the shelf? Yeah. Do cats clean their butts? I thought only their, no, no, no. Cats clean their butts. Cats do a deep cleaning of their derriers. They absolutely do. They really do. Yep. I'm not going to go in any more detail than that, but yeah, cats clean their butts big time. It's one of the great things about cats as a pet. You don't have to wash them. They wash themselves everywhere, everywhere, including their claws. They clean their claws too with their mouths. It's a very interesting process. Again, I'm also glad that I don't have to use my teeth to clean my fingernails, that we have other options for that. Okay, just checking for any more questions. Okay, right. So we are now my hair is all combed. It's still wet, but that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and braid it. So, I forgot to grab, darn it. I forgot to grab my kerchief. Okay, well, we'll see what I might be able to come up with what I have in the room. In any case, braiding time. So, this is just a regular 3-strand braid. Some of you have asked me about French braids. I cannot document French braids to anywhere in medieval Europe. And I do mean anywhere across any of the 1,000 years that I've looked at for visual representations. I'm not saying they didn't exist. I just haven't personally found that evidence. So instead of using an elastic, and for those of you who want to minimize the microplastics in your life and minimize elastics in general, here you can just use finger loop braiding to finish off your braid. So this is actually a sample braid that I did from a class. I think this might even have been someone else's braid and they just left it, right? So it's very short, but these short sample braids are great for keeping around. I have a whole pouch that I have just for my sample finger loop braids so that whenever I need a tie for something, I have it. So in this case with my hair, I'm going to actually take this and braid it into my braid partially and then use the ends to just tie it off. And then I don't have to worry about it falling out. It won't fall out. It will also not break my hair the way elastics will. It adds a little bit of fun color to the braid. And it's, eliminates the need to create more petrochemical products in the world. So I just braid it in like that. And then I take the ends and I tie them off. And I can also use these finger loop braids, not just for hair, but I also, these finger loop braid samples, I use them to actually tie off things like bags of food, ingredient bags of flour, anything in the kitchen where I need a tie, where I would use where you could use a rubber band. You can use these as well. So then you don't need rubber bands that are breaking and, becoming waste in the environment. You can instead just use the finger loop braids that you make when you're practicing a braid and use them as basically to anywhere you need a rubber band, it can take the place. So there we go. There it is, all finished off. There it is. Okay, comments. I even made them into friendship bracelets and event favors. Yeah. They make great bracelets. They also make great bookmarks, depending on the kind you're making, but especially the flat ones, they make fantastic bookmarks. I've got some books marked somewhere around here with them, actually. Oh yeah, right over there. The book of caring over there is bookmarked. So yeah, finger loop braids make great bookmarks. They've got all kinds of practical purposes, specifically from especially the practice pieces that are too short to really use in any kind of fashion application or even in a pouch, but therefore they make great tie-offs for anything where you might need an elastic or a rubber band. And I have on my YouTube channel, I have a tutorial, a detailed a succinct but detailed tutorial on how to make a beautiful braid called the Green Doors, which is actually this one. So I can actually, if you want to learn to make that one, it's on my YouTube channel. It's free for everyone and accessible. Easy to do. It explains everything you need to know in order to finger loop braid, so you don't have to worry about not knowing the basics. It starts from the basics, and it makes a really beautiful braid that you can then use as narrow wear to trim your necklines. You can use it for lacing. You can use it to tie off your hair. Lots of options there. Oh yeah, I love Hildegard von Bingen. Yeah. So Tea with Tash says that it's interesting how we all have our favorite Heras, but how you're getting into earlier stuff all the way. Yeah, Hildegard von Bingen. Yeah, I love her stuff. Like she's a polymath, right? Hildegard von Bingen is an amazing woman. She does it all, right? She's an herbalist. She cooks. She's a philosopher. She's a musician. She's a songwriter. She studies the Bible, right? She studies scripture. She really is this amazing woman. And she accomplished amazing things in her own time, and she commanded the respect of kings across Europe in her own era. They would seek her out for advice. So just imagine what she could accomplish now, living in a a liberal country, living somewhere in Europe, for instance. She would have been able to wow, just the things she could have accomplished if she lived in a slightly different time, considering what she managed to accomplish given the limitation. I'm not talking about limitations on women per se. I mean, I'm talking about like the technology that we now have that she could really, really use to flesh out all of her genius. Yeah. These finger loop braids, these ones are made of, these are test braids. So they're just made of cotton, but like cotton string, colored cotton string, usually crochet string, usually is what I use for testing pieces. But most of the extant finger loop braids that we have are made of silk. Got some silk ones over here. There are some other examples of finger loop braids. So this one is made of silk. It may or may not actually show up in the camera very well, but this one's made of silk. And the most common to have survived are made of silk. This is made of linen, actually. And this is a more advanced one, a chevron of 8, slightly more advanced chevron of 8. Get it to focus in. Yeah, chevron of 8, right? Yeah, this is made of linen yarn. So we have most of the extant ones are silk, and we have some examples of wool. There's a couple of extant ones of cotton or linen. That doesn't mean, though, that it was uncommon for them to be made of cotton or linen. Cotton or linen just do not survive in the archaeological record. Cellulose, plant cellulose, it deteriorates really easily in most soil conditions. There are some exceptions. Egypt, for example, is great for preserving cellulose fibers. But yeah, so most of the extant ones we have are made of silk, and it's on an accident that it was silk women who were commissioned to make laces like this. So this was generally, not always, but generally for the most part, the documentation says that finger loop braiding was literally a woman's profession. Not in any kind of, sexist way. It's just what they did. So we have silk women who are, listed in plenty of expense accounts. It's so humid that my little hairs are just sticking everywhere. We have, they're listed in expense accounts as being the primary makers of these narrow wares, as they're called. Oh yeah, Machaut is also fantastic. I do love Machaut as well. Yeah, Machaut's fantastic. Let me see. Yeah, she would so be. Yeah. Hildegard von Bingen, she would totally be a tuber these days. You're absolutely right. Bingit is better than Da Vinci. Change my mind. No, I won't. Twitchy, I won't try to change your mind. Yeah, Hildegard von Bingen was absolutely, absolutely a genius. Okay, so now, normally I would put on a coif, my kerchief actually, but I did not bring it back here. Well, before I sit down anyway, I wanted to show you all some progress on some things. So I think I'm just going to take my hair and I'm just going to tie it up over my head, which you do see women doing in you see some women, like for instance, this woman behind me, she has her hair tied up over her head. Yeah, it's not it's not exactly right for my hair to be exposed like this, but it's what we're gonna have to go with because I'm not gonna go figure out where the heck it is I put my kerchief down. Okay, so before I sit down and start sewing, are there any other questions about how I'm dressed? So this is the underlayers, right? And some people, it's really funny. I get criticized for calling a video in which me and my damsels are dancing in just this as dancing in our underwear on one side, and then the other side I get criticized for just wearing my underwear if I just go out like this. But the reality is that for women of upper class society, the smock and the kirtle is really, it is the underlayers. It is, and we know that, for instance, because there are actually court cases. For instance, there's a case of a woman being abducted in 1440s in England. And the case actually says, the lawsuit, there's a lawsuit brought, and it actually says that this woman was abducted naked from her home, but that she was wearing naught but her kirtle and smock, which tells us that the 15th century idea of naked is not the same. And there's many other sources that bear this idea out. That modern idea of nakedness is not the medieval idea of nakedness, right? So we know that in 15th century England, for certain, the idea of naked included wearing nothing but a kirtle and a smock. So basically, this man found this woman at home. She was casually dressed because she was at home in the privacy of her home, which this also could be documentation for the idea that the way a woman dressed in France and possibly Burgundy and England in this era, that the at-home attire could in fact be your smock and your kirtle, and that was acceptable. Like that's possibly one way to read that mention of this, her being naked because she was at home dressed like this, and the man abducted her and took her. So yeah, so yes, if I were going out, I would definitely put on, if I were going out in a medieval context, I would definitely put on another layer. When I actually go out and about dressed like this all the time here in Korea, I do not put on another layer because the other layer that goes over top of this has an 8-foot train. And I don't want that train being dragged through the city, because city streets, even though it's Korea is actually very clean, there's still lots of detritus on the streets, brake dust from car brakes and motorcycle brakes, pollution, etc. And I just don't want my medieval gowns dragging in that. So yeah, this is what we're wearing for the medieval sewing party. And I cannot believe I forgot my kerchief. Oh well, yeah. Okay, questions. Let me see. The guys that I play are a bit later. Yeah, so Twano Arbo, yeah, Arbos, yeah, the 16th century dances are much less interesting to me. They actually sound a lot more Baroque than they sound medieval, stylistically speaking, and they are. 16th century music, dance music especially, has much more in common with Baroque music than it does with 15th century music and earlier. The sound is just completely different. And I also prefer the dances in the 15th century. Well, I prefer the dances in the 15th century when I'm wearing 15th century clothes, because 15th century dances move best with 15th century clothes. If I'm going to do 16th century dance, then I want to be wearing the clothes from that era, because then the dances move well. Let's see. Oh, am I wearing bling? Oh, yes, bling. Sorry. Yes, I do have bling. And this is probably going to trigger some people. Okay, so you all have been asking about it, and I will go ahead and put it on and show you, even though I know many of my fellow reenactors criticize me when I do this, but there it is. This is a replica of a collar worn by Maria Portinari, worn and owned by, not just worn by, owned by her. And she is depicted as wearing this in a betrothal portrait when she gets betrothed to Tommaso Portinari. And then about 10 years later, give or take, she's depicted in it again in the famous altarpiece that is in the Uffizi, the Portinari altarpiece, right? And so this collar, there's a lot of debate. Would a woman, if a noble woman, if she was at home wearing just her kirtle and smock, would she therefore also wear something like this, or would she save it only for special occasions? I have not found any evidence either way. But I know that throughout history, humans, all humans, men and women, like to bling up. They always like to add a little bit, they always like to add flair to their ensemble. So why not? So yes, this is a collar made by, it's a replica made by Armor and Castings. It is cast pieces. So each of these components are individually cast and then hand painted, hand enameled. You should paint the enamel on, and then before the enamel, it's electroplated with gold. And then each of the colored pieces is hand enameled and then done again and then assembled. So even though it's cast, it's lots of work to make one of these, but you can buy a replica of this and many other beautiful pieces from Armor and Castings on their website. Contessa 10 gets you a 10% discount. Yes, they are a channel sponsor. This is another of my favorite Armor and Castings pieces. It's called a nuccia or a nauccia in 15th century English. You might call it a pendant or a brooch. Neither of those words really make an appearance for this kind of thing in 15th century English. And this is a replica of one owned by Mary of Burgundy. Yeah, it's a beautiful piece. I love this. And if I remember to bring my hood, I would have put this on my hood for you. Yeah. Okay. Why do you get criticized for wearing that? Because, yeah. Yeah, because there are reenactors out there who believe that unless you wear all the layers, you shouldn't wear bling. Yeah, so that's it. That's it. There's some people who feel very strongly about it. Yeah, they feel very strongly that, you know, unless you're wearing all the layers, you wouldn't wear this, that this should only be worn on very special occasions. But it's bling. Why would you have an expensive piece of bling that you don't wear commonly? And actually is evidence that men, at the very least, men definitely wore collars like this when they were just out and about. There is a record, a court case. Court cases are some of the best way to get an idea about how people actually thought and what they actually did on a daily basis, right? So there's another court case, a criminal court case from the 1440s. A man, a merchant, mind you, not a nobleman, gets mugged basically when he's traveling from one city to another. And I don't remember what his 2 points of traveling were. This is England at the time. And he gets mugged, and because he's claiming for his stolen goods and he wants compensation for them. And he's wearing one collar and he has two others with him. So he has a total of 3 collars stolen. And he's wearing one of them when he's just riding from point A to point B. So not a special occasion at all, not a courtly affair. He's literally just transiting from one place to another, and he's still blinged up. So yeah, you know, and for that, he loses all 3 of the collars. Wow, I saw a YouTuber complaining that people hand sew their clothes, about people that hand sew their clothes and bragged about it. People are petty. Yeah, yeah. Won't you get suffocated while wearing that dress? Nanda, why do you think I would be suffocated? It's extremely comfortable. It's fitted exactly to my figure because I make everything for myself, by myself, and I do hand sew everything. So it's fitted perfectly to my figure. It's not constraining in any way. It's not like it's binding me in any way, right? Look, I have full range of motion, right? I can kickbox in this dress. Ask me how I know. Yeah, it's very comfortable, even though it's really humid right now. And it's kind of mild temperatures. It's about 27 degrees right now, centigrade, about 80 Fahrenheit. But it's like 99% humidity. And even then, it's wool with linen against my skin. It's still very comfortable. So definitely not suffocating at all. Let me see. Is it heavy, the necklace? The necklace is heavy. I mean, it's not it's not unbearably heavy, but it weighs about a pound. So it is certainly, it is a solid piece of jewelry. Definitely. Absolutely. 100%. Now, if I were wearing the gown that goes over this, it would actually in part sit kind of on top of the collar of the gown a little bit. So that would actually take some of the weight off of my skin. But honestly, I don't notice it after a while. Yeah. Let me see. Okay. Okay. So, oh, question. Why do I live in Korea? The easy answer is the US military. The longer answer is more complicated and maybe a discussion for another time. But we love Korea. We love Korea. We love it here. We choose to be here. Yeah, love Korea. It's a great place to live. Yes. I'm based out of Korea right now. Living is a strong word. I live a nomadic lifestyle actually at the moment. But yeah, I'm based out of Korea right now. Hoping to settle down a little bit more solidly in the near future. I don't live in period dress all the time. I just often end up wearing it because I wear it for these live streams. And then once I'm dressed, I don't feel like changing again. So I often end up spending my whole day dressed like this or in some other equivalent outfit, not because it's any kind of statement. It's just what ends up happening. But thereby, I can tell you that it's possible to do everything modernly in this ensemble that I could do in modern clothes because I've done it all. I can cook, I can clean, I can work out, I can go running, I can climb mountains. I have hiked mountains here in this, dancing, obviously, going shopping. Yeah, I can do it all. So, yep. How much does my coronet weigh? My coronet is not here. It's out in the other room. My coronet is about, I don't know, 3 pounds maybe? 3 pounds. It's pretty solid. My coronet is pretty damned heavy. It needs to be on something else. If it sits right on my head, I get a headache for certain. Yep. Okay. Any other questions? Otherwise, I want to show you while you have other questions about maybe my ensemble. And if you're just tuning in and wondering why my hair is exposed, it's because I left my kerchief at the other end of the apartment and I don't want to interrupt the live stream to go and fetch it. So I have braided my hair and I've just tucked it up on my head in a little crown, as it probably would have been worn under the kerchief. So that's why my hair is exposed. I should be wearing a kerchief. I really should. I won't disagree with you. I just don't have one literally anywhere near where I am at the moment. Oh, Eleanor, so awesome. Thank you. Welcome to the community. Really appreciate you being here. Okay, so this is, some of you may have seen my post about the thumb, the pin to the thumb bone. The thumb's doing just fine. You can't even tell which thumb it was. See, no infections. Yay. The thumb is doing fine. This was the garment on which that I was sewing when the injury happened. This is a new smock, right? This is my new linen smock. And it looks super wide. I don't know why it looks so crazy wide in the camera. I know it looks like it's huge, but it actually is geometric construction. And you can see it's fitted into the waist and it is almost done. So I've gotten all of the, yes, I just need to pull the pins out. All of the seams have been finished. It's been hemmed. So now all I have to do, last thing I do, I'm going to actually cut out the neckline. So this is going to have a square neckline, and it's going, unlike my other kirtles, I'm not going to cut the neckline too deep. That's a big danger of these garments, is to cut a neckline that's just way too deep. So I'm going to be very cautious about cutting the neckline on this one so that it does not end up being too deep and too wide. But yeah, it's almost done. And I bring this out with me on my morning walks. I walk 3 miles to the end of the river, where the sidewalk ends literally, and I sit on a beautiful boulder and observe the beautiful mountains and the sun rising. And I've been bringing this and sewing it while I've been there, and lots of the Koreans just love it. They stop and they ask me about it all the time, and when I show it to them, they say, "Oh, what a nice dress," because to the modern eye this looks like it's a dress, but in the Middle Ages this is underwear. How fun is that, right? Yeah. So yeah, this is my new smock. This is my new smock. It's almost done, but I'm not going to cut the neckline out here on this live stream because I don't want to be distracted when I'm carefully plotting the cutting. So for today's actual sewing project, I will be doing more repairs on my hosen, because the life of a practitioner of living history, someone like I who actually lives, when I put them on, I live in the clothes full speed, full impact. You know, I've worn holes in all of my hosen and now they all need to be repaired. How do I finish my neckline? So once I cut the square out, I'm going to do, I'm trying to see if anything I'm wearing has it. The smock I'm wearing has it on the back. So I'm going to do a facing. And the facing is going to be such that this is the back side. This is the facing itself. This is the front, the shell. So the facing is going to be like that. It's going to poke up just a little bit so that the facing absorbs all the dirt and detritus from my skin. And then when the facing gets all grungy, then I can just tear the facing off and put a new one on. But that means that the fabric that will be possibly seen will be better preserved from the vicissitudes, the fetid conditions of our human skin. Yeah, so that's what I'm planning to do. And that technique of doing a facing that pokes out just the tiniest bit above the top, that is absolutely a documentable technique from Diego de Cavanilla's garments, which are all finished like that. His farsettos, the color of his farsetto is finished like that, and so is the color of his jornea. So I'm going to now apply that idea to my smock. The idea being that you want the part that could possibly be visible to stay as clean as possible for as long as possible, and that the part that wears away is actually the part that's against your skin generally, and so that should stick up and take all the dirt and the oil, and that eventually even laundering won't get out. And then when it gets too grimy for even laundering, then I can remove it and replace it. Yeah. Let's see. I keep meaning to get fabric for a new smock. I think after the weekend, 100% looking after my sister's dog. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you know, my smocks have gotten to the point where they were threadbare. This was an essential choice for me. Very essential to move into making a new smock. Yeah, so for those of you who might want to follow my travel adventures, I actually post things like my morning tea drinking and the beautiful views that I've had. The last couple of weeks have had amazing views. So you can go check that out on my Travels with the Contessa channel. That's where I post all of my travel adventures and the beautiful views and beautiful encounters that I have out in the world. There's a lot of crossover between my living history and my travel, because as you may imagine, I like to travel to places of historic significance. So there's probably a lot of interesting crossover content. Maybe my flight vlogs might not be as interesting for you, but I have a certain very acerbic sense of humor and self-deprecating wit that definitely comes across in my flight vlogs. Anyway, the last couple of mornings of last week has had some amazing dawn formations because I'm surrounded by mountains here. So here I am in Daegu, South Korea. It's literally is like a fortress city. It's surrounded on all sides by stunning mountains. And so in the morning, I sit and watch the sunrise, and there's this amazing cloud formations that just rise out of the mountains. And then the pink light of dawn hits the veil-like froth of clouds that are literally being born out of these mountains, and it illuminates them in the most amazing way. Yeah, it's quite captivating, actually. So if you're interested in that, check out Travels with the Contessa. Okay, other questions? Let me see. I think you need to do an actual show or Anthony Bourdain medieval style. Absolutely. Anthony Bourdain, very formative for me in my much younger years. I loved Anthony Bourdain's death. God rest his soul, was heartbreaking for me. Yeah. I would love it if I could get, funding to do an actual show Anthony Bourdain style. I think I would rock that 100%. I wore a pair of PJ trousers in a hole, so maybe it's just meant to be. Oh, yeah. I mean, there comes a point where you can't patch things anymore, Let's see. Have you used historical Korean clothes? I've not only used historical Korean clothes, I've made them. If you scroll back in any of my channels, whichever one you're watching, you can actually see the first historical Korean garment I have made, a 17th century danso coat, which is basically, you might look at them as culottes made of hemp, but they're actually one of the underlayers that gives the volume to to the Korean garments, to Koreans women's garments in the 17th century. Dansoko. Right. Yeah, you can actually go and check those out. Yeah, I have a massive hanbok wardrobe of a historically inspired hanbok. And I'm now getting into making hanbok. And some of you may know I've got a big research project coming up with Dr. Minji Kim. I'm going to be examining late medieval and early modern, so Joseon era, mostly Joseon era, because that's mostly what we have, but also some Koryo era clothing, to examine it, to research it, to study it specifically for how it was put together, which layers, which pieces came first, how the seams were done, when the seams were finished, at what stage, right? So I'm going to be going to museums with her, and I'm actually going to be handling actual historic garments, Korean garments. So yeah, stay tuned for those adventures. That's coming up this fall. Let me see, what did they use for eye protection on a bright day? It doesn't seem they did. It does not seem that medieval people in Europe anyway felt the need to protect their eyes. At most ladies' I put a veil over my face. Like literally I just take my veil and put it over my face, and that helps reduce the glare. But the reality is that in most medieval cities, sunlight didn't touch the streets of most medieval cities. It just didn't, because the buildings were really close together. Roads were narrow, alleys were narrow. So in the city, you probably wouldn't have to deal with very much bright light. If you were going out for a country excursion, we don't know. They wore hats. They wore in the 15th century, you actually see some hats with brims developing that would have helped keep the sun out of your eyes. Like I said, I put a veil over my face. That's something that I haven't found any documentation for. They had spectacles in this era, but I've never seen any evidence of sun spectacles. Right, only spectacles at first for people who are farsighted so they can read, and then in the end of the 15th century, spectacles are developed for people who are nearsighted, right, so they can see distance. But none of those are made with shaded lenses that I've ever seen. So it just seems that it might not have been a problem that they had, because in the parts of the world that are really sunny, like the Mediterranean, Greece, now modern day Greece, Turkey, Italy, Spain, right, Malta. All those places have cultures where you don't go out at the brightest and hottest point of the day. So, out in the morning, the sun's not too strong. In the late afternoon and evening, the sun's not too strong anymore. So I think it just might not be a problem that medieval people experienced so much. And peasants who are working in fields, they always have these big brimmed hats that would help keep the glare out. So I hope that answered your question about what people would do for eye protection on a bright day. Do you know anyone that does Japanese historical clothes here in YouTube land? I do not know any Japanese historical tubers, but I will just say that my favorite historical Japanese fashion, hands down, the Heian era, absolutely stunning and absolutely impractical. I love your username. My name is Contessa. I've never seen it used. Oh yeah, so Contessa is actually a title. Interestingly, in 15th century Italian, and then it becomes a name also. So it is the Italian equivalent of countess. So hence I am a countess, and and I also do a lot of Florentine, Northern Italian 15th century material culture and interpretation. So the creative Contessa was born. Let me see. Yeah. Twitchy Witch says that. I think the Eskimos had eye protection though. Yeah, so maybe, yeah, people up absolutely in those stark, especially in the summer with the sun glaring off of back when the polar caps were still there and they still had, snow all year round. Yeah, confident they had something, but it doesn't seem to be in Europe. Now, I don't know. Thomas, are you still there? What about in northern Sweden? Do you know anything about how the people living in the Arctic Circle protected their eyes in the Middle Ages? The Suomi people, for instance, the Sami people who live up there. They might have had something. It could have just been as simple as wrapping your face up to hear the way they do in the deserts, right? The thing about desert people across the world, right? They basically wrap their faces entirely so that the only thing left is a slit, and that restricts the amount of light that's actually getting into your eyes, for instance. Yeah, condesse, conde, exactly, Tash. Yeah, medieval cats were definitely not lazy. Medieval cats had to hunt. Yeah, this is This is not a medieval cat. Although even still, cats will be cats, and cats do sleep a lot to regenerate from their efforts. Let me see. Heian Japanese clothing and music is absolutely fascinating. It's amazing how they took the Tang Dynasty's culture and shifted it to their own tastes. Yeah, it really is. I just love Heian culture. Okay, so let's go ahead and get to the sewing part for me anyway. What is everyone working on today? Does anyone else have projects? Am I the only one projecting today? Let me just adjust the camera down. Bring the light closer. I will be, as I said, I will be working on continuing repairs. I'm also going to have some tea now because I've been talking for almost an hour nonstop, and my palette is needs a little wetting. Yeah. So frustrated that I forgot to bring my kerchief with me. So I'm going to be repairing stockings, and I will describe that process as we go through it. I also have some fun discoveries to share with you, and I wanted to give you a little preview of tonight's medieval sewing party. Yeah, so we've got some interesting things planned. I've got some fun planned for our sewing session together. Yeah. So yeah, so modern kimonos are definitely nothing like Heian. Not at all, not even, I mean, except for that it's a kind of robe that wraps around your body. But in terms, yeah, there's no obi in Heian fashion. So you don't have that going on, that very, yeah. Hi, Timmy, baby. What is it? What do you want, huh? Oh, you know what I didn't do? Oh, I am so bad. Yeah, that most people aren't used to constant muscle engagement. Yeah, yeah. The Heian layers are definitely a whole different ball of wax. Yeah, I love Heian. It's pretty fantastic. Oh, Chimi, what is it, baby? My cat is now getting. Oh goodness. Okay, okay. Come on into the lap. Okay, so this is the stocking I'd actually started repairing last time, and I never got around to finishing it. So I guess we'll do that now. So here we go. I'm basically just resoling the whole stocking because the holes that I've worn into the bottom are such that the fabric is just completely deteriorated away. So it's not even like I can just do individual patches. And in any case, the reality is that eventually I end up wearing through the fronts and the backs of my stockings, and so that might as well just put a whole new sole on. So for those who don't know, 15th century stockings are cut. They're cut cloth, and they're cut on the bias, right? So there's actually some stretch, natural stretch that is created by just cutting the fabric on the bias. So that actually conforms to the curves of your legs somewhat. Still not the same as modern knit fabrics or even later 16th century knit, but it does provide some actual shaping. So stockings are not just baggy and shapeless. But actually knitting has the benefit that it actually takes more abuse. It's actually stronger than just regular tabby woven fabric, right? The braids didn't want to stay up. My hair's too slick for the braids to just stay up. Damn my new hair care routine that just relies on the natural oils from my scalp to make my hair nice and slick. Yeah, so the knit stockings actually have a longer shelf life than cut cloth stockings do. But I'm still, that's why I'm just going to resole all of them eventually with this really heavy duty fustian. Yeah. Yeah, the obi was absolutely an Edo invention. Yep, 100%. I love the obis. I love them because they're beautiful, but I would never say that they're comfortable. Yeah. Okay, so I am actually, so some of you may have seen, I actually unspool my threads from modern spools and spool it onto replica medieval thread storing methods. So that, oh, Chimi. Look at look at the kitty. He's so happy. Are you happy, baby? Yeah. He's my snuggle bug. The other two aren't really snuggle bugs. Chimi is actually my snuggle bug. So basically what I'm doing to apply this sole is I'm pinning it all the way onto the bottom, and then I'm going to blanket stitch it onto the stocking so that the stitches will have more longevity and it will be firmly secured in place. uh, Eleanor, even if your hair is slick with this kind, it will not. Yeah, so you don't want, if your hair is slick, you don't want a slick ribbon. If your hair is slick, you want finger loop braid made from something like linen or cotton or wool. And then that will actually grip to your hair. And because it's actually braided in, it can't come out. It won't come out. I promise you. If you braid it in and it's made from the right material, it will not come out again. Yeah, Chimi's such a sweetie. He is a sweetie pie. He's also a greedy little devil, aren't you, Chimi? Yep, you are. So I've read in the news today. Oh, and by the way, we will have the medieval buzz on Monday night, Tuesday morning with Philip from Irish Medieval History. And one of the things I will be discussing in more detail is how Portuguese researchers have managed to recreate what was a lost dye recipe, lost ink recipe for blue ink. And they did it using a combination of 3 different medieval manuals, art manuals on how to make your own paints and pigments. And they actually identified the plant that should be used, and then they went and they recreated this amazing blue ink. And I guess it's not just for ink, it also works as a watercolor as well. And so I'll be talking about that in a lot more detail in the Medieval Buzz episode early this week. And I'll be talking about exactly how they did that, the techniques they used, and they actually used some seriously scientific equipment to actually, as part of the analysis, because they analyzed the blue ink that was, on the original manuscripts, and then they started comparing the components that they identified using, chromatography, etc. And then they found the recipe that they think is used to make it based on that analysis. And yeah, so very, very interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff. What's exciting about it from the perspective of manuscript preservation is that when you are trying to preserve art, in this case, illuminated manuscripts, it's best, and let's say conserve and maybe restore, it's best if you have the same kinds of materials that they used. That's unfortunately a mistake made by a lot of restorers down through the centuries, that they use materials that are corrosive and that are not like the original, and therefore either damage the original piece. Well, at best, they just don't look right, especially in the way they age differently from the other materials. But at worst, they're corrosive and they damage the original piece. So these sorts of discoveries are actually important for preserving our heritage, our literary heritage, our artistic heritage. Yeah, the Portuguese is me. Yeah, so Portuguese dress history. Portugal is a really fascinating polity. I mean, the Iberian Peninsula is a fascinating place in medieval Europe in general, because anytime I make a broad sweeping statement about Europe in the Middle Ages, I almost invariably hedge it with, but not on the Iberian Peninsula. Because yeah, the Iberian Peninsula is it's such a cultural melting pot, because first, you've got the Indo-Europeans, and then you've got the Celts and the Phoenicians, and then the Romans, and then the Visigoths, And it's accruative. Like all those cultures, none of them vanish. They get integrated into this thing. And then you've got the Moors and all of the amazing technology and literature and music and fashion and culture and medicine and science that they bring with them. And that blends with the Visigoth culture that's already there. And of course, the Jews at the same time are coming and bringing all that they can to the table. And so until, 1492, when those Reyes Católicos basically ruin the Iberian Peninsula, and they ruin Portugal too, ruin is a strong word. Well, they do. They bring the idyll to an end because they insist on the expulsion of the Jews and the Muslims. And with that comes this major brain drain. But before that, you've got all of this amazing melting pot of thoughts and cultures and art and food. And that all ends up being reflected in the clothing as well. And so clothing in Portugal and because Portugal is actually one of the kingdoms that's been on the Iberian Peninsula the longest, as such, as under that name, Portugal, right? They have just some really interesting clothing. Portugal also has, in the Middle Ages, developed close ties with England and Burgundy. And so the fashions that they've already developed in their own little special melting pot then get influenced by Burgundian fashions for both men and women, and so that evolves it a little bit more in yet another direction. But basically, the layers seem to be the same. In the 15th century in Portugal, you have a smock like this, and then you've got some kind of kirtle-like thing like this. It's the overlay over top that seems to be pretty different and pretty interesting. Unfortunately, because there was a massive earthquake, of course, if you're Portuguese or Brazilian Portuguese, in the 18th century, there was this massive earthquake that happened during the Easter Vigil. And because there were all these candles illuminated specifically for the Easter Vigil in the whole city, all the cities across all of Portugal, the city's all caught on fire, not just Lisbon. And so vast troves of art and archives literally went up in flames in the 18th century. So unfortunately, we don't have quite as much that has survived for Portugal as has survived in other places. That being said, the one piece of art, one very important piece of 15th century art that has survived is the Alfonso V retablo altarpiece. And it is an amazing altarpiece. St. Anthony, maybe? St. Anthony? Might be St. Anthony's depicting. There's a whole book just on this altarpiece. That's how amazing it is. It's massive. And it depicts the royal family, several generations of the royal family, plus a whole bunch of saints, plus courtiers, from about 1440 to 1460, I think is the dating of the altarpiece. And what it shows us is some really fascinating clothing for the men and the women, especially the women have styles that I haven't seen literally anywhere else in Europe in that era. So yeah, there's not much visually that has survived from Portugal's Middle Ages, unfortunately, because of that 18th century disaster. But what has survived is pretty fascinating. There's a lot more that has survived in... Chimi, did you sit on my thread? You did. Chimi sat on my thread. There's a lot more that has survived in the rest of the Iberian Peninsula. So Castilla, Aragon, Asturias, Galicia, Andalusia for certain. So yeah, more has survived there than has survived in Portugal, but it's pretty interesting. They've got some interesting headdresses for the women. The men generally kind of look like a species of Burgundian fashion, but that is definitely identifiable as being, that's not quite the Burgundian court. It's like it, but it's adjacent, not an exact replica thereof. So yeah, very interesting stuff. Was a lot made from llama wool. In Europe, no, nothing. Llamas are not European. But wait, I missed a misconversation. Let me see here. Let me see. Let me see. Oh goodness, skip back. Okay, my DNA is everywhere except Asia. Also, the slaving. Also, my people were a bit of a problem. Yeah, yeah, I'm American. I understand what you mean. Okay, let's see. Speaking of pigment, I found a source of local oak galls and I want to have a go at making ink. Oh, twitchy, nice. Oak galls are very fun to work with. There's so much you can do with them. I mean, not just ink is one of them, obviously, but you can also do fabric dyeing with oak galls. Are they oak galls that you actually just go out and harvest? Although I read somewhere that, is it true that in England you're not allowed to go, or you're allowed to harvest the plant part of the plant that's above the ground, but you're not supposed to harvest the part that's below the ground because if it's wild, because that would disturb its growth. Is that correct? But oak galls are just an offshoot of oak trees. So are you allowed to go and just harvest wild oak galls? Let me see. Oh, goodness. Okay. Clearly I missed some stuff. Yeah, not gaijin. Takeda, she wasn't talking about a gaijin. Let me see. Uh, Daniel, do you mean llama wool in Brazil? Yeah, there are definitely no llamas in medieval Europe of which I'm aware. Burke, welcome to my community. Thank you for joining us. They are, however, getting quite rare in the UK because of the wasps suffering from pesticides. Yo, damn it. Damn it, our overuse of pesticides is just destroying so many parts of our ecosystem. Okay, so for those who don't know, oak galls, if you hear me ever referencing oak galls, they're basically scar tissue that forms on an oak tree that is the result of an infestation in a specific spot by a specific kind of wasp. Well, at least I'm not certain if it's a very specific kind of wasp, but a wasp. And these oak galls are used to make things historically like ink, like dye stuff, because it contains a lot of tannins and iron oxide, and it will oxidize to black, right? So that's why it makes a fantastic ink. It oxidizes to black. But if we're using, oh, I definitely should double this thread. If we are using pesticides, we're killing the wasps that then infest is a strong word, that get into certain parts of the oak tree and then make the oak galls, which means there are fewer oak galls. Wow, I didn't think about that, Twitchy. That's pretty rough. That is pretty rough indeed. Yeah, there's no naturally occurring llamas in Brazil either, right? Llamas are up in the Andes on the other side of the continent. Yeah. Again, the idea that continents are monoliths and that if there's something in one part, there must be something in the whole parts. How often do I have to rant and rave about Europe is not a monolith, medieval Europe is not a monolith, right? Yeah, llamas. Oh, good. Okay, just making sure. Yep. Okay, so glad to Kate. I would hate for a misunderstanding to arise over something like that. Yeah. Okay, so I am doubling my thread in this case. I don't always work with double thread when I'm sewing because actually double thread can be very annoying to work with. It knots on itself much more often, and one side of your double thread is just as like to not want to be the same length as the other side of your double thread. But because I'm resoling the bottom of my shoe here, the bottom of my stocking, I want it to be extra. I want extra thread because I will wear through the thread. I dance literally hundreds of miles a year in these stockings, probably because I do a lot of medieval dance. And so I definitely need to have the thread be able to withstand my abuse. I am working in a silk thread, and silk is highly documented for upper class garments. And I am depicting, right now I am depicting a countess in an extreme state of undress at home. So undressed that I don't even have the basis level of veil on my head. But that means that my garments would absolutely be made of, would be sewn with silk thread. More often than any other kind of thread, including even my linen undergarments. We have some extant linen undergarments that are absolutely sewn with silk thread from the 15th century. That is definitely documentable. I actually think, and don't hold me to this, but I think some of the extant bits that were found in Langberg, the hempt, the smocks that were found in Schloss Langberg, were also actually sewn with silk thread. Don't quote me on that, though. I'd have to go back and look at the archaeological report again to verify that. But I have seen bits of linens undergarments that have survived that are sewn with silk thread. So yeah, let me see. So when does the Middle Ages end? That is a very interesting question, right? When does the Middle Ages end? So the Middle Ages is one of these, obviously, it's a construct like any historic era. And some people will say that the Middle Ages starts uh, when the last Latin emperor of the West dies in 476 and the Ostrogoths invade Rome. Other people will say that the Middle Ages actually starts in the end of the 6th century after basically with the Justinian plague. That's where I actually think that the Middle Ages starts, at least in Western Europe, or actually most of Europe, because the Justinian plague is a pretty traumatic event that changes a lot about the way things are done in Europe, including how much of the ancient Roman technology still functions. Then the question is, when do the Middle Ages end? What is that magic endpoint? Because of course we all want to think that on December 31st, 1499, people went to bed and it was the Middle Ages, and on January 1st, 1500, it's the Renaissance. But that's not really how it works. And honestly, in my opinion, the term Middle Ages is maybe outdated anyway, because it comes with a whole lot of baggage, right? And it comes with this idea that it's a period that is united in some sort of way. And I'm not certain if there's any one central feature of the so-called Middle Ages that is actually truly present in all of this period of time. You know, some people will say, well, feudalism. Well, I got news for you. Feudalism wasn't actually used in much of Europe, and actually only lasted relatively briefly. And now historians are beginning to wonder if feudalism actually really truly functioned at all the way that they've hypothesized it. Modern historians are re-examining what the Victorian historians came up with and the Georgian historians came up with, and coming to the conclusion that maybe feudalism wasn't actually a thing in Europe at all. I'm just the messenger. I'm just reading essays about this. I'm not convinced, but it's interesting to think about it in different terms. Okay, so if it's not feudalism, what else could it be? Is it the presence of the church as a central and dominating force in Europe? Well, that's not true for the entire medieval period either. It takes several centuries of the so-called medieval period for the church, capital C, to establish itself across the whole European scene, right? So that can't be the thing that really binds it all together. And there are various heresies that spring up, all heresies in quotes, not my judgment, what they were referred to in their own era, right? There's the Cathar heresy, there's the Hussite heresy, there's, you know, in the earlier church, there's, God knows, Jesus, all sorts of different versions of Christianity being promulgated. So, okay, what is this one unique feature that unifies, you know, the Middle Ages? And I don't think I can reasonably come up with one, because certainly it's not, you can say, oh, well, it's a lack of guns. Well, hate to tell you this, but gunpowder enters the war scene at the end of the 13th century in Western Europe, much earlier than most people think. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone is wandering around with Glocks. That's not what I mean. There's no knights with Glocks, sorry. But, you know, by the 15th century, gunpowder is being used as a black powder weapons are being used as a psychological tactic in any given war. So I would still personally count the 15th century in the so-called Middle Ages, however we decided that is. You know, and it's not even, you can't say, well, it's pre-industrial, because there's an industrial revolution that happened starting in about the 11th or 12th century in medieval Europe, when they start designing things like water mills that drive hammers and sawmills driven by water, right? They developed this whole water-powered economy that creates machines that take the place of manual labor to produce goods that are needed for civilization to take the next step. So yeah, I'm not certain how when the Middle Ages actually starts and when it actually ends. And depending on where you are, that answer is probably going to be different as well. Was Korea affected by the Justinian plague? I think it was, actually. I think the Justinian plague spread across Asia. I seem to recall something about a plague getting to Korea in the 6th century. Don't hold me to that, but now that you say that, I remember reading something in one of the museums about a 6th century calamity. So I think so. Oh yeah, always wax your threads. Yep. Beeswax. Where's my beeswax? I just had it. Damn it. Here it is. Yeah. Beeswax. So this grimy cancerous looking thing is beeswax. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the melt off beeswax from my expensive beeswax candles, that the drippings that drip down on the candlesticks. I peel them off of the candlesticks and I put them, glom them together in a nice ball. And then I haven't wasted any of the beeswax from the candles, and I have my wax. So yeah, I'll demonstrate waxing. So you always want to wax your thread. This was already waxed. I'll re-wax it. So you take your wax you take the thread in your fingers and you pull the thread through it with the wax in your hand one direction, and then I do that in the other direction as well, like so. And the wax smooths the fibers out, and it makes it so that the thread will last longer as you're sewing, as you're pulling it through the fabric again and again and again. And it will also prevent it from knotting on itself. Now, it will retard the rate at which your knot threads. Your thread is probably still going to knot occasionally, but it will happen much less often if it's waxed. Yep. Yeah, sorry, I must have missed a comment. I hate double thread even more when you knot it at the bottom. You can make a mistake, you cannot go back. Yeah, double thread is so annoying. I am using beeswax. Yep. Oh yeah, so Twitchy says she wants to try making starch from lords and ladies. Yeah, I want to get a hold of some of that stuff. Unfortunately, I definitely can't get that here. I cannot procure lords and ladies here. Nope. The not common word that I'm thinking of is what is the other word for lords and ladies? Is it also sometimes mistakenly called arrowroot, but it's not the arrowroot that everyone thinks of? There's another name for it, the one that actually crops up in medieval texts. Damn it, I've forgotten what it was in 15th century English texts. Yeah, so that maybe that should be the end of the medieval era, is the Reformation, right? But then but Susan, when do you consider the Reformation to have started, right? Are you talking about, is it Jan Hus? Is he the start of the Reformation? Because there definitely are sects of Christianity that spring up as a result of his preachings in Bohemia. Is that the start of the Reformation, or is the start of the Reformation with the Cathars in the 13th century, right? It can get really tricky, even that. It's like, well, is the Reformation when Martin Luther nails his 95 Theses to the door of the church in Wittenberg, right? Where is the start of the Reformation? It's trying to actually reasonably define these eras can be so tricky. And I think the answer, honestly, is probably the same as for when does the Middle Ages end. Your mileage will vary. It sort of depends on where you are. Because when the Reformation starts in the German-speaking polities is definitely not the same place when the Reformation starts in England, for instance. Johannes Kepler is part of the Reformation. I mean, he's a scientist. So when you say he's part of the Reformation, what do you mean? I don't recall him doing any preaching. I mean, he's in the Reformation for certain. Or do you mean he lives during the Reformation, Johannes Kepler? Yeah, what do you mean by this statement, Frog? It's an interesting statement. I would like to chase it down a bit. I read books about hand sewing from the 1900s and 1910s, and they recommend it. I think we stopped using it with plastic thread became a thing. Yeah, tea with tash, absolutely. Agree with you 100%. When we started using plastic thread, and in case everyone's wondering what plastic thread is, that's anything made from petrochemicals, in my opinion. So nylon, polyester, Rayon is kind of one of these middle spots. It's actually not really microplastics. It's just a natural synthetic. um, yeah, I agree. When you started using artificial thread, then it didn't really need to be waxed so much anymore, although waxing would still prevent it from knotting on itself for certain. But I wish someone had taught me about waxing thread years before I learned about waxing thread. I have often lived in isolation of other medievalists, so I don't always have the benefit of just learning. In fact, I almost never have the benefit of learning from other people in any kind of casual way. So I've had to figure out a lot on my own, and it's only in the last, I don't know, 10 years that I would say that a lot of really good information has become available on the internet. And so yeah, I wish I'd learned about waxing my thread long before I finally did, because it would have saved me a lot of frustration. And welcome to my live stream for those joining. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And if you're enjoying this, then maybe consider becoming a patron or a channel member. Lots of extra perks for patrons and channel members. Extra access to exclusive content, tutorials, live Zoom sessions. We have our live Zoom session this week, and I've scheduled 2 different ones. Twitchy, just so you know. I've scheduled one for what would be evening Americas, and one that would be that would be a time that's more suitable for people in Europe anyway. Being that I am currently in Korea and most of my followers are not in this time zone, makes it a little challenging sometimes, but we make it work, don't we, community? How did they dry clothes? If I just hang them, it takes forever to dry. Well, so it depends on the time of year and where you are. They often dried clothes out in the sun on a grassy meadow. So first off, most people didn't launder their own clothes. They paid a laundress to launder them. And the exception would just be extremely poor people would not pay a laundress, but most people paid a laundress to do the work, to apply their professional expertise and make their clothes snowy white again. So mostly the only clothes that were laundered, that were actually wet laundered, were white linen underthings. Like this, the smock would be wet laundered. And that would be boiled in a pot with fermented urine, and then any kind of extra special stain treatment would be applied, and then it would be hung to dry in the sun. But then after it had dried mostly, it would be laid out on these grassy meadows, and it would be bleached by a combination of the UV light from the sun and the oxygen that's being respirated by the grass below. And they would actually lay things out to dry that way in the sun for up to 7 days, regularly 7 days. Things would be laid out. Now, if you're going through a rainy period, yeah, that's your guess is as good as mine. I have not found any references to how people handle rainy drying your clothes, your small clothes in rainy days. Possibly in those cases, you would hang them by a fire. Right, you would probably hang them by the fire to dry, and then the fire would help them dry. So I think that's probably because mostly in Europe anyway, if it's raining, it's usually going to be cold. If it's raining a lot, it's cold. It's not like here in Asia where it's raining, it equals the summer. In Europe, constant continuous rain usually means it's cold. So people are probably going to have some kind of fire going for heat, maybe even just a brazier. So if you hang your clothes near that, then they will dry. I think is probably what was done. But they also may have just waited to wash their clothes until it was sunny again. Yeah. Let me see. Kepler, Kepler is I'm pretty certain that Johann Kepler is 16th century, long before the 30 Years' War. Pretty certain. By the Zoom, I will have linen. Yeah, and that's the other thing. Thank you, Han, for pointing that out. Linen it depends. So I don't know what kind of clothes that you've had, Isabella. What fibers they're made out of. Linen dries extremely quickly. Even in wet conditions, it dries pretty well and pretty quickly. It's very good at just casting off the dampness, basically. So, and the things that they were washing were the linen layers that were against their skin. So even in damp conditions, it will dry. Wool, wool will not dry. So if wool is wet and it's also moist, wool will not dry so well. It takes a little while for it to dry. Yeah. Yeah, frog. All you can remember is that they washed clothes in urine. Yep, they used urine as a degreasing agent and as a bleaching agent. Fermented urine is the seriously the Swiss Army chemical of the Middle Ages. It was great. It's great. It is great to this day. It is great at breaking down grease, so it will get out grease stains, and it will also actually properly bleach your clothing. Um, and I don't, I, it will actually break down the stain and remove it. Whereas modern bleach, by the way, everyone, modern bleach does not break down the stain and remove it. It literally just shifts the stain into the ultraviolet spectrum so that we can't see it. Which is why when people and crime shows try to wash away the blood with bleach, and then they come in with the UV lights and they can still see where the blood is, it's because the blood is still there. It's just been shifted into the spectrum, away from the visible spectrum. So modern bleach just shifts it away, whereas fermented urine, as far as I understand, actually breaks down the pigments, and then they can be rinsed away. That's my understanding of how fermented urine works, because it also does that for grease. It breaks down the grease. Yep. Let me see. Here in Brazil, we still hang our clothes. I have to fight my way into using our dryer. I live in the south of Brazil, and we seem to fight the idea that half of the year is very cold. Yeah, I was going to say, in the south of Brazil, you've actually have seasons. Yeah. The wringing would also be softening the fibers. Yep, wringing would actually soften the fibers. Wringing, though, so interestingly, Han, the manual I read that provided the recipe for and the instructions for bleaching your clothes actually specifies that you should not wring your garments. And I think that's because they acknowledged that the wringing would actually, it softens the fibers, but it also damages them. So it actually specifies not to wring the garments. And I'm trying to remember exactly which of the sources it was that said that. But I remember reading it at the time and having a kind of eureka moment, because a lot of delicate clothing made of actual natural fibers, in the washing and care instructions will say do not wring this. And that's because wringing absolutely damages the fibers and will shorten the shelf life of one's garments for certain. Isabella Mero says, I heard something about a hot room being used. So, I mean, it depends on where you are. Historically, whether they would have a hot room, and the season. But yeah, even in most medieval castles through most of the Middle Ages, even though they didn't necessarily have fireplaces because they didn't have chimneys, they would at least have a hearth in the center of the room, and there'd be a hole in the ceiling, or they would have braziers. So the room that's called a solar in English is actually the heated room, right? That's the room that has some method of heating it. And so it is very likely that that is probably where they were drying their clothes. What the heck? My lady mother is attempting to reach me in the middle of a live stream, so I'm going to apologize for that sound. I tried to make it go away and it refuses. Great. Okay, gone. Sorry about that. Let me see. Well, thank you, Swan. Appreciate that. Was the thread back then not made very strong? Would they have to re-sew clothes because of weaker thread? So that's a good question. And it depends on what you mean by the thread back then. So if you're comparing, I mean, I'm going to tell you right now, if you compare the strength of polyester thread to silk or cotton or linen or wool thread, there's no comparison. Polyester thread is 100% stronger. I'm not even, there's no point in even arguing that. It's just true. Just try, if you want to damage your fingers, try using your fingers to break polyester thread versus break cotton thread and see what happens to your finger. But if you want to compare apples to apples, so modern cotton thread to medieval cotton thread, their thread could be just as strong as ours. In some cases stronger because of the way in which it was hand spun versus the way machines do it now. So it would not have, if you're using natural fibers, they would not necessarily have broken down any faster than our natural fiber thread would have broken down. Maybe a little bit, but not much. A lot of people in the UK don't have dryers. We air dry everything. Yeah, I immigrated to Germany when I was 22 and lived a happy German life for 12 years, and I didn't have a dryer and I didn't want a dryer. We hung dry everything, and it all dried. Even in the rainiest of seasons, it eventually dried. But depends on the fibers that you're talking about. Silk dries much less quickly than linen does. Wool definitely dries less quickly than linen does. Yeah. Depending on where you are, also, if you're in the winter, if you live in a place that has real winters, then apparently they have this fantastic snow cleaning method in the winter. So you can actually dry clean your clothes in the snow. I haven't had a chance to try this yet, but I really want to. And if any of my Nordic courtiers are out there, if you could explain more about your dry cleaning, your snow cleaning methods, please do, because I've only heard about it. I've never actually seen it, and I've never actually done it. And I too am fascinated by it and would love to at some point. I keep hoping we'll get some snow here and I can take some of my medieval garments to the snowy patches in the mountains and give it a try. But yeah, um, maybe that's why in the UK and in other countries, Christmas was a time for new clothes. Wringing could be the only method of drying and thus increase damage. Yeah, for instance, although also Easter was often a time for livery to actually be distributed from a liege lord or lady to their people. So not just Christmas, but also Easter was another time of renewal of garments. Oh, Lauren, thank you. This collar, this is a replica of Maria Portinari's collar. It dates to the second, sort of the third quarter of the 15th century. This replica is made by Armor and Castings, and you can actually absolutely go and check out their website and purchase one if you like. It's not inexpensive though. It's made of cast metal and hand enameled. Everything has to be assembled by hand. So there's a lot of handwork that goes into this beyond just the casting itself. So it is a pretty expensive piece, but honestly, it's worth it. And it's super well made. And this thing is going to last forever. Yeah, it's a style of collar that is very popular in the Burgundian court, and a lot of English nobles end up with such a collar because of the English ties to the Burgundian court. And so you see a lot of women in portraits from the 1460s, 1470s, 1480s wearing collars like this. But this is specifically Maria Portinari's collar, and it is a lovely piece. Yeah, it is heavy. It is absolutely heavy. This collar is definitely heavy. It weighs a couple of pounds. Like it's definitely more than 1 pound, but it doesn't like sitting here. I don't feel it. Now that you've made me think about it, I can feel its presence, but otherwise it just kind of vanishes into the background. I'm from Gothenburg. We don't have snow. We have 50 shades of gray slush. Yeah, I know. Southern Sweden, the climate is changing. It's so sad. But you used to have snow like 50 years ago. Yeah, the last time I was in Sweden in the winter, I was in Stockholm in December, and it was definitely 50 shades of gray slush. It was not super lovely. We have two seasons in Texas, dead and alive. That's sad too. Who controlled the style back then? Who said what looked good? Swan, that's another excellent question. Thank you for that. No one did. It's so who controlled what looked good? So if you're talking about who set the fashion trends, the fashion trends were set by the court. They were nearly always set by the court, and they were set by the men. They were set by the regnant prince, capital P. For the women, they were set by the regnant princess, capital P. Sometimes they could be set by the king's favorite mistress, also, actually. But usually it was whoever was actually on the throne who set the fashion. There could be, sometimes there might have been a cadet branch of the royal family or the regnant family that might have set a younger trend in fashion. But yeah, it was usually the person who was on the throne or who held the reins of power in any given place who set the fashions. And fashion did absolutely change. It just didn't necessarily change as rapidly as it would change for us. And unlike for us, there doesn't seem to be as much, it doesn't seem to be as many styles recycling. as we now have, and certainly not at the pace at which styles recycle now. Some people say that the idea, the concept of fashion is basically invented in the court of Edward III. Like they literally say, this is the invention of fashion, Edward III and co. And his that's from an Anglo-centric perspective. But 14th century is like the birth of fashion, a lot of people will say. And I don't agree with that at all. Not even in the slightest bit. First off, in the 12th century, you've got some real clothes horses wandering around. I mean, the bliot, men with wearing bliot with trains. Yeah, let's talk about fashion, shall we, for a moment. And even before that, fashion doesn't necessarily, how do you define fashion? When people say, well, it's the birth of fashion is here, there's some kind of arrogant implication that the clothes that came before weren't fashionable. They were just fabric that you put on your body to not be naked. And I absolutely disagree with that sentiment 100%. Humans are peacocks. We like to look good. We like to look nice. So for as long as we've been putting something on our skin to protect us from the elements, we have sought to make that thing look nice in whatever way we possibly could. That's my perspective. Oh, goodness. Oh, yeah. If you're Lorraine, if you're going through, yeah, if you're having sensory issues, this is not the collar for you. This is probably not the collar for you. Although it will not tease you, you will know it's there. It will not be a question of feeling like, something is flitting about your skin, but probably not the right thing for you in this stage of your life. Do you know much about the Gaelic royals? So by Gaelic, do you mean Ireland or Scotland or Wales or Britannia? Or do you, yeah. So there in the 15th century, there are, it's a complicated situation in Ireland. It's a very complicated situation in Ireland. But we know, and you can't just, royal is maybe the wrong word, but from a European perspective, they did often refer to the various polities and say 15th century Ireland as being kingdoms, or they're having kings. And we do know some things about what they wore. So we have some effigies, we have some descriptions by travelers to those places. So we do know some things. And in the first millennium, we know a lot about what, say, Irish kings and queens are wearing, because they have the Brehon laws, which are very, very in depth. And it seems that the royal courts in Ireland in the first millennium may have been heavily influenced by the Byzantine court, is what it seems possibly. And then they were influenced by, there was a lot of Norse fashion influence that comes onto the peninsula. Yeah, that's a long and intricate question. If you'd like to know more about 15th century Irish fashion, men's fashion, I did a video that's over on Philip from Irish Medieval History's channel on Gaelic Irish men's fashions. Yeah, so do I know much about the Gaelic royals? I know quite a bit, but it kind of also depends what you mean by the Gaelic royals. Like the royal house in Scotland, for instance, do you consider that Gaelic? I know a lot about what they were wearing in the 15th century for certain, for instance. Yeah. There are always influencers, and I kind of love that. Yeah, right? Yeah, it's not Burke. Yeah, this collar is not uncomfortable at all. It really isn't, and it shifts. Like you can see, it's very mobile, right? It's very flexible because of the way it's put together. All the pieces are put together with 100% flexible joints, so it's not cast as one solid piece. It's cast as like 60 pieces, and then they're all put together. So yeah, 100%. I definitely recommend this collar. And I just realized I don't have enough light here. And Contessa 10 gets you a 10% discount at anything at Armor and Castings. So absolutely take advantage. They have amazing pieces. They've got rings, they've got belt buckles. Wonder if I had my belt here. I don't. They've got buckles, they've got necklaces of all kinds, brooches of all kinds, spanning like 1500 years of human bling culture. So you can find a very wonderful range of very quality items at Armor and Castings. And if you check them out on Instagram or Facebook, they post videos all the time of making things. So you can actually see the process that is involved in making these pieces. Again, a lot of people have this misconception about medieval jewelry. They think that because it's cast, that all you do is you pour the metal in the mold, pop the mold, and there you have a finished product. And that's not the case at all. There is so much post-processing work that needs to be done on a cast piece to make it actually be beautiful and wearable. So you can actually see part of that process on their channel. I'm actually working on a video on medieval rings. I've got some really fun stuff to share with you in that video. And it involves, I definitely have footage from Armor and Castings showing them working on their rings, so you can kind of get an appreciation for the amount of extra work that goes into each of them. Oh goodness. My husband is a welder, so he's into any kind of metalworking. Oh yeah, then you might want to definitely might want to check that out. Yeah. Twitchy Witch. Oh, see you at the Zoom. Twitchy, I'm doing my medieval cooking show tonight, my time, which will be the middle of your day, your time. So it'll be at a comfortable, easy time for you to participate in. It's really great to see you back in the live stream, though. Did the regular women back then have a large wardrobe? Did they have lots to choose from, or did they have to share nice clothes in the family? When you say regular women, I might need you to specify a little more what you mean. Because in the 15th century specifically, for instance, I'm going to keep it nice and narrow. In the 15th century, for instance, there is a growing artisan, and merchant class that are getting richer and richer and richer. And so they can actually afford quite a lot. Now we know, and I'm not certain if that's what you mean by regular people, because they're not aristocracy, they're not nobility yet, but they can definitely afford quite a lot. But in terms of, if you're talking, sort of on the lower middle class, or, the middling sort, we have lots of wills all across Europe. In England, there's will registers from York and from London, and there's will registers from Dublin. And these generally show the wills for people who are, say, candle makers or wainwrights or cartwrights, solidly middle class, not fantastically wealthy middle class, craftsmen, the craftsman class. And what we see is that they did have multiple garments. So, there's a cartwright might have 3 or 4 doublets and maybe 3 or 4 garments to go over top of that, a couple of shirts, right? So I don't know what you mean by, did they have a lot of clothes? So I guess for the modern person, having 3 or 4 outfits is maybe not a lot. So probably in comparison to modern standards, your average middle-class modern person, Westerner, versus your average middle-class 15th century medieval member of medieval society, yeah, they had way fewer clothes. They definitely had fewer things in general. Now, would they share clothes? Maybe, but you definitely see that everyone has their own garments, and that everyone seemed in the middle, in the hand worker classes and the merchant class, they all seem to have at least one outfit that is their best outfit, and then they have another outfit that's usually categorized as their second best, right? So it doesn't seem that in the working middle class, like in the professional classes, by which I mean a profession, like a handcraft, like master wainwrights and master cartwrights and master chandlers, et cetera, et cetera. It does not seem like they had to share very much of anything. They did have their own things. They just didn't have as many things as we do. And the women as well. Same thing for the women. I know he's just talking about male examples, I just realized, but for the women as well. Women would have several gowns. They would have several kirtles. They would have several smocks, talking about, say, a silk woman, or a baxter, a female baker, or a brewster, a female brewer, right? And depending on how successful they were, they could certainly have a lot more. We do have wills from very wealthy, very successful silk women, for instance, one who was a member of the Merchant Guild of Tailors in London in the 15th century. She had a lot. She had a large wardrobe, and she had a large collection of things because she was very wealthy. So it really came down to your level by the 15th century, it comes down to your level of wealth. And we know that even before that, people are starting to obtain more and more things, to the point where at the end of the 13th century, in the early 14th century, people are petitioning, end of the 13th century, Edward I, end of the 13th century, the Commons is petitioning Edward I passed sumptuary laws restraining certain craftsmen of a certain level from wearing garments that are too fine, too splendid for their station, right? So we know that even by the 13th century, it's starting to happen that even craftsmen, yeomen, even are able to afford and are affording and are buying and are wearing some pretty splendid garments, relatively speaking. Oh goodness, the chat moved on really quickly. Let me see. I live in England. Let's see. Was it more common to buy clothes or just have people in your families make clothes? It seems like it would be more expensive to buy the materials back then. Yeah, so one of the primary cost of garments in the Middle Ages was absolutely the materials, not the labor. The labor was, however, not necessarily cheap either, but it was cheaper than the fabric and the materials. So by the 15th century, I have not found evidence of people still making things in the home, with the exception of small clothes. It does seem that even in noble families, the noble women are actually making the small clothes, meaning the underwear, the breeches, the braids, smocks, the chemises, they're called in French, for the members of their family. In Italy as well, in the 15th century, that seems to be the case. But for what we'll call the fashion layers, the kirtles, the gowns, the things that go over top, those are being made by professional tailors. Those in all seem to be made by professional tailors. There doesn't seem to be a lot of home clothing making happening in medieval Europe. Now, the parts of society that aren't well documented, like the poor, it's harder to tell. But what we do know is that there's a very thriving secondhand market everywhere in Europe. Everywhere in Europe has a thriving secondhand market. And I always say Europe's not a monolith, et cetera, but in this case it is. Everywhere in Europe has a thriving secondhand market. And so garments that are actually will be sold off to a secondhand dealer, and then they will be purveyed at a secondhand market. And we have a depiction of a secondhand market in Bologna from the early 15th century, late 14th, early 15th century. I think it's like 1403 actually. And it shows what is clearly a poor man wearing ragged clothing, shopping at the secondhand market and trying on a garment that clearly is very old-fashioned relative to the era of the actual depiction. Like, it's actually old. It's like 20, 30 years from a garment from 20, 30 years before the actual painting was painted. And so we know that even poor people could afford to buy clothes and that they would buy them from the secondhand market. I really think that most people didn't have the time to do whatever it is they did to survive as a profession, to earn money and also make their own clothes. Honestly, I think that's why either they commissioned them new when they needed them, they repaired what they had when it wore down, and when it wore past the point of being repaired, it was either upcycled into something else, recycled into something else, or in the case of certain people, they were sold to the secondhand dealer. And in the case, especially of garments that are old-fashioned or that might not fit someone who inherits them from someone who's deceased, often when people were bequeathed garments in wills, it wasn't necessarily so that they could wear it themselves. It was so that they could sell it and get the money from that garment, because that's how valuable garments were. That's a great question, Swan. You're just asking some really awesome questions today. Let me see. Interesting. I thought they would make it. Yeah, I mean, so we have, I think modernly, we actually, when we think of people making clothes, we think of we think of the 19th century, right? We think of the pioneers in America, especially for Americans, for Americans. I don't know if I can't speak for Europeans at all on this score, actually. But we think in America, we certainly think of pioneers. We think of people living out on the front where there is no industry, where there is no market, where you couldn't just, there were no tailors yet. There were no people to make those garments. And so they had to make them themselves. But, being out in the West, and an American moving westward and, forging a life out there on the plains, meant you did have to do everything for yourself. And so I think a lot of people take that pioneer, that impression of what pioneers did, and they apply that to medieval life when they're not connected at all. Medieval life was very sophisticated. Industries were very well established. Labor was extremely specialized to the point where, carpenters weren't just people who worked with wood. A carpenter was someone who actually made the wood for making into other things. And then you had joiners, and you had cartwrights, and you had wainwrights, and these are all different kinds of woodworkers, right? But a carpenter was not just a general woodworker. There was all those different specialties were specialized. So yeah, I think that part of the issue is that there's a modern misconception, people applying their idea of, say, frontier life, and that's how it must have been in the Middle Ages. And again, it depends on when and where, but certainly by the 15th century, I don't think many people are making their own clothes at home anymore. Not in most places anyway. There are certain clothes that people are making themselves, again, small clothes. And in the 16th century, when you have all these tailoring manuals coming out, I honestly, that's the 16th century, and I'm not an expert on those, and I'm not certain what their target audience was, if it was the at-home sewist, the at-home clothing maker, or not. But I suspect not. But that's just my suspicion. Okay, wow, lots of great conversation. Did the slaves here in the Americas make their own clothes? Yeah, that's a good question. I know that often they were given cast-offs. I know they were often given cast-offs, but I'm not completely familiar with the day-to-day life of slaves in the New World in terms of how much of their lives they controlled. And controlled is the wrong word. Whether they were making their own clothes, or they were given their own clothes, whether they had the means to purchase their own fabric, I cannot answer. Not my area of expertise. Honestly, the colonial era is just depressing. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, good questions, Swan. Really appreciate that. Really great questions. Everyone's asking good conversations today. I am so glad that all of the trolls that came into my live stream the other day and were talking about certain recent events in the United States seem to have either quieted, or have gone away, because that's definitely not what my live stream is about. I have my own views, obviously, but this is not the place for that, and I don't want it to be the place for that. I just want to have a nice, pretty medieval sewing party. Yeah. Yeah, I have to say that generally I mean, I know a lot about history in general because I'm generally fascinated, but when it comes to the details of material culture in especially in the slave communities, I'm not at all well versed. And honestly, the information is probably harder to come across than it is for other subsets of society. Oh, sorry, Chimi, did I sit on you, baby? Didn't mean to. Wrapped up and stretched over top. I don't know. I might have to redo some of this patching in the sole. We'll see. We'll see. Come on, Chimi. Come on, baby. Come on. Come on, baby. Here you go. Here we go. I'm sorry. Was I not paying attention to you? I apologize. Actually, I think I didn't feed them this morning. I got so busy preparing for this live stream and working on my medieval rings video that I think I failed in my primary duty as kitty servitor, and I don't think I gave them fresh food. So I think Chimi wants me to give him fresh food. I think is what's going on here, honestly. Oh, really? Could you not push the needle into my finger, maybe? Yeah, I do appreciate I really love the little details of any historical period, the daily life. I love understanding how people lived their daily lives. I think that's why I'm drawn to, clothing in particular, because clothing is such an informative layer for daily living. And, the history classes, they always focus, history classes in most institutions of higher learning are honestly a fail. They're a fail because they focus on the big battles and the treaties and the plagues, right? That's all they focus on. You learn the big names, big man history, right? You learn the big names, but you don't learn anything about how actually people lived their lives. And how people lived their lives contributes to whether there's war, to whether there's famine, to whether there's innovation. And so I think if history were actually taught to include the nitty-gritty details about how people lived on a day-to-day basis in various classes of society, if the fashion were actually taught and correctly, if food history were taught and correctly, and from a hands-on perspective, I know that more people would take an interest in learning about history and therefore hopefully not repeating it as much. Yeah. What can you tell us about Dindal? Oh, Dindal or modern? Yeah, so I lived in Germany for 12 years. So the Dindal are basically like the descendants of what was fashion, the way that that fashionable clothing developed across various parts of Germany. And it went from being what was fashionable, and then it kind of fell to being, well, it's just sort of the peasant classes, but clothing, national clothing, what's considered local national clothing for most of Europe was invented in the 19th century. Whole cloth, no pun intended, because there's this big move towards nationalism in the 19th century and a big move to define us versus them. And one of the ways you can define us versus them is by so-called traditional clothing. But it seems that a lot of these so-called traditional clothing is literally invented. And it's created as a combination of kind of what's being worn in, say, rural villages. Like there's a lot of ethnographers who go to rural villages to see how people are dressing. And they see how people are dressing there, and then they say, oh, well, this must be the traditional things. This must be the way people, real Breton people dress or whatever. And so that gets kind of fossilized in a certain way as the garments of that region, and it's really artificially invented. The same thing with the kilt, by the way, in Scotland. So the dirndl is basically, at its evolution, it's originally a version of what people were just wearing in like the late 18th century, early 19th century, before the Regency fashions came in and really changed everything. And then it's kind of modified to make it look like, well, this is a Bavarian dirndl, right? So, and then it becomes our folk costume. This is our national costume, and then it gets propagated as being some kind of ancient long tradition, but it's really not. It's their pretty recent invention. Yeah. Yeah, nationalism ruins it every time, right? Yeah, pretty much. And yeah, absolutely, the winners write the history books and rewrite the history books and burn the history books. They do. They absolutely do. So a lot is left out of the history record, which is why I always tell people that history needs to be founded on, our understanding of history needs to be based on the holy trinity of understanding, of historical understanding. Iconographic, meaning visual representations from the era, documentary, and as broad a base of documents as possible, and of course, archaeological, because archaeology, let me see if I can make a statement that's going to set my wall on fire. Archaeology is less likely to lie than documents are, shall we say, and also less likely to lie than art is. Art is also a tool, and it can be used as a political tool. It is absolutely used throughout history as a tool for propaganda. And so you cannot just look at a piece of art and say, well, that's how people dressed in 1422. Understand the context of that work of art. Understand what it is it's trying to depict. Is it trying to depict an actual, currently alive, contemporary individual? Is it trying to depict one of their ancestors? Is it depicting a god or a goddess, an allegory, a saint? What is the message of this particular piece? Because the message that it's trying to convey might also actually impact the clothing that the people in it are wearing. So even art can be dangerous. I feel like archaeology might be the purest, the least biased of those three, the least intentionally biased anyway, of those three prongs. But we should understand history in examining all three of those layers, not just in one or the other or the other. I only joined the chat 20 minutes ago. You may have already mentioned this, but what is the most common materials used for clothing? I have not mentioned it, Swan. Keep the questions coming, guys. I'm really enjoying the live chat this morning. Thank you so much. So in the 15th century, the most common is linen and wool. Linen for the undergarments, mostly. The smock, in this case, is the 15th century English word for this linen undergarment. Wool, like this, for the outer garments, whether it's the interim layer of the kirtle or the outer garment. That's the most common. Cotton is a very rare fabric in this era. It's used as a fiber, a utility fiber for padding garments. We do have some cotton thread from this era as well, but the most common materials fabric-wise are linen and wool in Western Europe. Obviously, that's your mileage is definitely going to differ based on where you are in the world. But in Western Europe, it's linen and it's cotton. Silk is a luxury material, but it is not unattainable. There are a lot of people of the middling sort wearing silk in this era also, and have silk accessories like silk girdles, silk belts, and whatnot. The most common sewing thread is linen. Silk is used for finer garments very often, but linen is definitely used mostly, is the most common in terms of what the majority of people are using. Let me see. There is hemp also, but there's a weird prejudice in the north of Europe, the sort of north of the Alps in Europe, against hemp, and no one has been able to explain it to me. And I'm not certain it's because they view it as being the corrupt fabric of God knows Mediterranean culture. I don't know, but there's a prejudice against hemp, whereas in the Mediterranean, sorry, my nose itches. I'm not picking my nose. I swear it just itches. Ugh. I got tickled by the little humidity frillies that form around my face, and now it itches. Anyway. So hemp is used absolutely in Mediterranean. It's a utility fabric. It's used for interlining of men's arming doublets, the faccetti as they're called. Let's see, other fabrics that make an appearance in parts of Europe. Oh, sorry, baby. There is some evidence of nettlecloth I've read about, but I haven't seen it myself, honestly. And there are mixed fabrics too. You have wool linen blends, wool silk blends, cotton linen blends. It's fustian. You've got silk and cotton blends I've actually seen in the archaeological record. So yeah, they also do have fiber blends, recognizing that there are benefits from both of those fibers and that one can enhance the other. Okay, other questions? Yeah. In one part of I mean, yeah, Germany. So remember that first off, medieval Germany is like 1,000, and I'm not exaggerating, 1,000 different little microstates, right? Different lordships, some of which fall under the dominion of the king of the Romans, the Holy Roman Emperor, some of which don't. Some of which are in vassalage to other groups. It's very complicated. But even in the 19th century, remember, it's Bismarck who unified Germany, right? Prussia unified Germany, and Bavaria didn't even join that until the end of the 19th century. So Germany in the 19th century is absolutely still a whole bunch of different states for most of the 19th century. And, they've all got their own thing going on. And even their own dialect of German in some cases was not mutually intelligible necessarily. Yeah. Oh, you bet. Yeah. Oh, goodness. Okay, I've fallen way behind. Do you have any old English names I can name my pup? Oh, Grendel. Grendel is a good Old English name to name a puppy. Grendel is actually the name of the monster, in quotes, from the poem Beowulf, right? And so actually my great aunties had a cat named Grendel. I think that would be a great name for a pup. Or you can name it after like an early English king, like Aethelstan or Canute, or let's see, other fun Old English names. There's so many fun Old English names. They nearly all start with the AE vowel. Yeah. Ethelred is fun, but Grendel is actually the name of the monster from Beowulf, so that's fun. Let me see. One thing people forget is that we tend to document the unusual. No one writes in a diary about people not smelling particularly bad or good. That's so true. So true, T with Tash. But I will tell you that one of the documents that I'm most likely to believe as being pretty factual and unbiased is casual correspondence. Casual correspondence, like from a mother to her sons, like in the case of Alessandra Strozzi. We'll be reading another letter from Alessandra at our upcoming medieval story time with the Contessa, by the way. But letters that are literally just work a day. Here's what I did. Here's what I need you to do. Could you please send me some of this? Right. Those tend to be pretty reliably accurate and not documented from any particular angle because they're not meant to be read by anyone except for the recipient. So if it's between a mother and her son, and we're not talking about the Queen of England to her, her son who's now, Duke of such and such a territory, but between um, um, wife in a cadet branch of a family to her exiled sons in Florence, right? Like those I'm more likely to trust than any chronicle, honestly. Did they paint their nails? In Western Europe, have not seen any evidence of nail painting in the 15th century in Western Europe or in any of the later medieval centuries. I do know that in the Middle East and um, in India, even to this day, they actually have at various times used henna to dye their fingertips, including their nails. So not painting like you might think of it, but their fingertips would be dyed. Certain cultures in Northern Africa, for instance. But in terms of like medieval fashion, no, I have not seen any evidence of nail painting in medieval Western Europe or Eastern Europe for that matter. But if anyone else has, I'd be interested to hear about it. See, I hate underwears and bra. What did they use for those items? Or did they not wear bras? They wore different things, right? So the dresses back then are self-supporting. So you see this, it's self-supporting, right? It's designed, this one is actually a little loose. I need to fix this one. My other smocks or my other kirtles are much better at being self-supporting, right? So in much of Western Europe versus Central Europe, they didn't actually, should trim this. It's actually a little. They didn't need separate support garments because this foundational garment was tight enough that it provided the support. We do know that in 15th century, in 14th century Bohemia and moving into other German-speaking areas like Austria and Central and German and what would be modern day Germany, we do know that they have these smocks, but they're strapped smocks. They don't have sleeves like this that are absolutely bust supportive. And there's an extant one called the Lengberg bra, Lengberg space bra, but it's not a bra. It's actually a whole smock. So it's got skirts and everything. It's got a fitted bodice, laces on the side, and it has two cups, inset properly shaped cups for the breasts. And it absolutely provides support and creates that apple-breasted look that you see in a lot of 15th century art, German art specifically, and art from Central Europe. And in Bohemia, they actually had these smocks that created this shelf and are very clearly self-supporting. So that's the kind of support that they didn't have. The Langberg bra, as it's called, is probably the closest thing to a modern bra, but it seems to have been very limited to that specific part of Europe and a very limited window of time. Because after that, then you start getting into very stiffened bodices that provide the support, etc. So yeah, for the 15th century in Western Europe, the gowns, the kirtles, like you see I'm wearing now, they actually are designed to be supportive. In Italy, there is some mention of this garment called a busto in inventories and in expense accounts, and that literally translates to bodice. And I suspect that might have also been its own form of bust support, where it's just a bodice that's basically designed to provide structured support, but not stiffly structured, no boning or anything, but it does provide the support. And then it doesn't matter whether your gamora is as properly supportive and fitted or not. So those seem to be the basic forms of breast support. There's some people have talked, there's some documentary evidence of women binding their breast with strips of linen, just wrapping it over top of your smock, and then that provides the support as well. Yeah, so those seem to be the general options for breast support. The breast binding one is kind of not necessarily as solidly documented as some of the other options I have mentioned. I'd be interested in more evidence of the breast binding. Oh no, my wax has fled. And underwear, so modern, I wish I could show you. I have a whole video. I have a video on my YouTube channel on medieval women and underwear. It is literally the most polemic topic in the medieval living history world, followed by whether I should be wearing this collar with just my kirtle. But yeah, if you want to see the information I have found about women and medieval women and underwear and whether they wore them or not, check out that video. My conclusion is that in certain places and certain times in medieval Europe, women definitely wore underwear. Not necessarily all women, not necessarily all the time, but sometimes they were wearing them. And I go into the details of that in that video. You can all kinds of great evidence for it, actually. Not a lot against it because you can't really prove a negative, but underwear like you're talking about would have been called breeches or brecca in 15th century English, bre in French, mudande or braccie in Italian. And it seems that for women, they were somehow distinguishable from the ones that the men were wearing. And so it's possible that they were actually briefer. And I have a pair that I've made, a conjectural pair. I've got 4 pair actually. I made them out of linen and I wear them modernly and they're super comfortable. They tie on the sides, no elastic, no stretchy, keeps everything nice and airy, not too tight, but not too loose. Yeah, they're actually pretty comfortable. But it does certainly seem that there were some women in various parts of medieval Europe who didn't wear underpants, didn't wear brecca, but also it seems there were men also who didn't wear them, based on certain of this body stories that you hear about. So yeah, let's see. Shoes must have been so expensive because not many people could make shoes, or is that also a common skill? Shoemaking was a common skill. It was a very common skill because everyone needed shoes. It was a common skill. Shoes were not unaffordable. There were different calibers of shoes, right? Just like today, right? There's a difference between, your workaday Nikes and your Gucci high heels, right? Big difference. And even back then, there was a difference in both the style and the quality and the materials. But a shoemaker was actually called a cordwainer in 15th century English, by the way. A cobbler is only someone who fixes the shoes. A cordwainer is someone who makes new shoes. And those are 2 different professions. And there was actually court cases fought in London lawsuits brought by the cordwainers against the cobblers because the cobblers were overstepping their bounds and they were fixing old shoes, basically just making new ones, by just taking like one tiny part of the old shoe and incorporating that into the new shoe. And they were trying to get around the laws that separated the work of the cordwainer from the work of the cobbler. So yeah, shoes, they weren't cheap, but they weren't super expensive either. Everyone had shoes, and shoes were repaired on a regular basis. A lot of the extant shoes we have from across the Middle Ages show signs of repairs. In some cases, new soles being added on, patches being added on, rips being sewn up. Yeah, so shoes were expensive, sure, absolutely, but they weren't unaffordable. It's just that you didn't get a new pair of shoes all the time. You repaired the shoes you had until they literally fell apart and couldn't actually be repaired anymore. Let me see. Now that we're talking hemp, was it common for people to smoke devil's lettuce in medieval times and such? Smoking does not seem to have been a thing in medieval Europe, as far as I can tell, smoking of anything. And that's possibly because they lived in smoke-filled homes and didn't want more smoke in their lungs, honestly. Remember that the chimneys are an innovation, and they're an expensive innovation that comes about in the 12th century. and only the wealthiest people actually have chimneys in their home. So what that means is that your cooking fire is a hearth in the middle of the floor. There's a hole in the ceiling, and some of the smoke goes out through the hole, but most of the smoke doesn't. So people are literally inundated in their homes anyway with smoke. So they're not going to volunteer necessarily to add more smoke to that. I think it might be part of the logic there. But no, medieval Europeans don't, I have no evidence of medieval Europeans smoking anything, or the most recreational, recreational substances seem to have been all alcohol based. So wine, mostly wine, ale, beer, cider. Distillation doesn't come about as until, in most of Europe until the 15th century. And I'm not certain when. I think that's when whiskey is actually comes about, is the 15th century, right? Whiskey, I think, is invented in the 15th century. So yeah, whiskey's not as ancient as you all would like to think it is because of the distillation part of it, right? Fermenting barley, sure. People have been fermenting barley for literally eons, but the distillation part that actually makes whiskey comes about later. Let's see. Let's see. My cat's name. Oh, wow. I'm really far behind. Oh my gosh. Oh gosh. I am so sorry. Wow. What was the content you said I could check out on the metallurgy and metalworking again? Oh, Takeda. Go to, all right, Armor and Castings. Go to Armor and Castings Facebook page and or their Instagram. They don't have a YouTube, but you can check out, they often show videos of them making their items. So yeah, Armor and Castings, ARMOUR and Castings. Also, that's the same people from whom you can buy replicas like this amazing collar and beautiful nauches, as they're called in 15th century English, like this, replica rings, like this really gorgeous piece, right? Really beautiful rings like this from their website. They have such an impressive range of reproduction metal items on their website, and on their Instagram and Facebook. You can actually see video footage of the production. Absolutely. But in my community, I have at least one metallurgist, Takeda, if you're out there still. Do you have any recommended sources of content for medieval metallurgy specifically? Obviously metallurgy is not my thing. Oh goodness. What did they do for feminine hygiene? If by feminine hygiene you mean the monthly menses, so it seems that one of the methods may have actually been moss. There's graveyards in Greenland. You might not know this. There were Norse colonies in Greenland, and the last Norse colony died out in Greenland in the 15th century. They were buried there. Their graves are there, and so in the last several decades, those graves have been excavated, and the clothing rather is very very well preserved in these graves. And in one of the women who was buried in this graveyard had a string, a kind of girdle tied about her waist, and the string went through her legs and it was attached to moss. And so they think then that moss would make an excellent all natural remedy for stemming menstrual flow, because moss is very absorbent. It's very flexible. You can actually rinse it out and reuse it. It's antimicrobial and it's abundant. God knows in a place like Greenland, it was abundant. So at least one thing for certain that I know was being used in at least the moister, more green parts of Europe was moss. We know that they used clouts, and this seems to have been rags that were secured between the legs between one way or the other. My theory is they actually wore breeches and used that to secure the clouts, but who knows? The clouts could be linen, were usually linen rags, and they would be laundered, they would be washed. And we know that because they're actually mentioned in certain laundry stain treatments. In fact, the most commonly mentioned laundry stain treatment across all sources I've read from original medieval sources talking about stain treatments The most common stain they're treating is blood. Okay. And I'm pretty certain that they're not treating, there aren't that many men getting wounded and bloodying up their clothes. I think women are the primary source of the blood stains, honestly. So, yeah. Let's see. Okay, Tea with Tash, thank you for joining. I'm going to be doing a medieval cooking live stream later on today, my time, which if you're in Europe will be middle of the night Europe, or middle of the day Europe on Saturday, or morning in the Americas. So I hope to see you back. Yeah, Lauren, I hope you can come back for my other live streams. I really appreciate you joining in. It's been fantastic having you in the community. What's up with the freaky long deck on the tapestry in the background? This? That's a lion, not a that's not a dog. That's a lion. And he does have a bit of a long neck for even for a lion, but it's a heraldic lion. This tapestry. I think that's what you meant. This is what you meant, right? Yeah. Yeah. What sounds uncomfortable? The moss. So there is a woman who's actually been experimenting with the moss, and she says it's very comfortable. Because moss is soft and it's flexible and it breathes. So yeah, yeah, it's very comfortable. And I especially think if it's supported by breeches, it would be just fine because there would be no weird pressure or anything like that. The pressure would be, any padding would be evenly distributed, so to say, across the body. Yeah. He's got some crazy body, yeah. So the reality is that the artist who drew this probably never saw a real lion. It's less likely they saw a lion. I mean, there were lions in medieval Europe. Royal menageries always had lions in them, and sometimes they actually kept the lions in the Great Hall or at the entrance to the castle. Animal welfare was not a thing in the Middle Ages, unfortunately. But yeah, probably the artist never saw an actual lion, probably saw drawings by other people who maybe also didn't see an actual lion or heard it described. So here we've got a stylized heraldic lion, right? It's a heraldic lion also, so it's stylized. It's not supposed to be representative of reality. That's not the point. This whole tapestry is an allegory. It's supposed to be 15th century fantasy. It's not supposed to be 15th century reality. Jet, welcome to my live stream. Thank you for joining. Let's see. Did you miss anything else? Okay. Yeah, so that is the deal with that. You all have been asking just some really fantastic questions this evening, I have to say. Really excellent stuff, guys. So I have been preparing for our medieval cooking show tonight, my time, tomorrow for many of you, or later today for some of you, depending on if you're in Europe and you're just now going to bed. And we're doing 2 recipes in my medieval cooking show. We're going to be doing zabaglione, which is the 15th century Neapolitan recipe, is almost exactly the same as the modern recipe. Talk about fascinating. This is an egg custard that is sweetened and flavored with red wine, and it is a super delicious custard. I love zabaglione. I haven't had it in forever, so I'm excited to make it again. And then we're going to be making, and just hear me out, the name sounds disgusting. We read this in Medieval Storytime earlier this week, larded milk. Okay, so I went and fell down a rabbit hole on larded milk for you all. And it sounds disgusting, but lard is not added to the milk, at least not like you imagine lard to be. Lard in 15th century English and French and Italian and Spanish, lardo, was often not the rendered lard, rendered pig fat, rendered pork fat, but was actually the word for pork belly fat, for yummy chunks of pork belly that have some meat in them and that yummy, delicious melt in your mouth fat that comes on it from pork belly, right? So larded milk is actually, after all is said and done, after I read through 20 different recipes from the 15th century for larded milk, what the lard seems to be, milk seems to be a fresh cheese like paneer, basically, and you actually, before you press it all together to make the cheese block, you mix in these chunks of pork belly that have been cut up nice and small, so that you end up with this yummy pressed cheese that has the pork belly distributed through it. And then after it's pressed, you slice it and you fry it. So it's fried cheese. Yummy, like halloumi, right? So it's kind of like halloumi, except that the medieval versions can have really interesting spices added to it, like cloves and nutmeg and ginger and galangal and long pepper and saffron, and it can be colored all kinds of different colors. There's even instructions in one of the recipes I'm going to read to you, because I'll read to you from some of the original Middle English, late Middle English, early Modern English pronunciation, so you can really hear the recipe as it would have sounded to a 15th century person. Some of them talk about making it not just one color, but actually making it so that it comes out as 3 different colors, so that when you slice it, it's like a rainbow. And then that same recipe talks about making motley cheese. And it says you make 3 different pots, add a different dye stuff to each of the pots, and then you mix the curd together so that it's like confetti. There's a recipe for confetti colored cheese in a 15th century source. How freaking cool is that? So yeah, I'm definitely excited to delve into this with you and for us to have some fun. Unfortunately, I do not have immediate access to some of the medieval dye stuffs like Saunders, which is red sandalwood. Um, or Saunders, the other Saunders, any of the Saunders. I don't have access to any of the Saunders, no matter which one it is. But I do have lots of saffron, so we will at least be able to make it yellow. And if I forgot to get parsley, but if I go back to the store and get parsley, then we can at least make yellow and green cheese and make it some fun colors and see what comes out of it. Yeah, so we've got some fun planned for you in my first ever medieval cooking party with the Contessa, but cooking in a modern kitchen. Yeah, so I'm cooking, remember, I'm cooking in a modern kitchen, but I do have some medieval or medieval adjacent equipment, and I will be dressed like this. So it'll be a motley show, shall we say. Do you prefer hand sewing, or is it just for medieval purposes? No, I prefer hand sewing. I love hand sewing. I love the feeling of the needle going through the fabric. I love the control, the granular control that I have at this tempo. I love being able to massage the fabric and the thread into a specific shape, which is really hard to do if you're using a machine. So I do prefer to hand sew. However, my predilection for hand sewing means that I have fallen way behind the power curve when it comes to my productivity. So I have borrowed a sewing machine, and I'm going to be using the sewing machine to do all the long seams on the next several garments so that I can at least replace the things that are literally disintegrating. Some of my gowns are threadbare to the point where not even patches are possible. So I need to get ahead of that. And so for that, I will be using a sewing machine. But I prefer hand sewing, not just from the perspective of authenticity, although that's a bonus when you're trying to get as close as you can to a historical material culture, but mostly from the perspective of I enjoy hand sewing so much more. Also, when you hand sew, you can take projects with you. I always have a hand sewing project with me wherever I go. I have my satchel of wonder, and in my satchel of wonder is my sewing project, which is why I often end up putting holes in my fingers when I'm out and about accidentally. Yeah, Brianna, I did used to hand sew as a kid, and I did really like the control. I just feel like now time doesn't allow. I mean, yeah, absolutely. You know, when you have time, then it's great. If you don't have time, if you actually need to meet certain deadlines and need to keep up with a certain pace, and or your life is just too busy otherwise, then yeah, I totally get it. Totally get it. So I'm kind of happy. I'm okay with letting the long seams go to the machine, because frankly, those are the most boring seams. I really love doing the top finishing, right? I love stab stitches. I love doing blanket stitches, buttonholes, lace holes. Like I really enjoy the fancy stuff. So I'm not actually terribly sad to let the long seams go to the machine. Yeah. Can you suggest any sources on period dyeing of leather? I'm researching this and trying methods. Yes, there are some, pretty much all of the dyeing manuals that are out there also have, because dyeing fabric and dyeing leather, they go hand in hand even in the medieval mindset. So all of the dyeing manuals have dyes for leather. So the book that immediately springs to mind is an Italian manual, and I'm pretty certain it's available as a transcription and translation. Um, I segreti per colore, I think is the Italian term. The secrets for colors, I think is how it would translate. I'm pretty certain I have mentioned this book in one of my book corners, and I think I have a copy of the book. No, it's online. No, it's online. It is online. It is digital. It is digitized, so you can find it online. I segreti per colore. Unfortunately, I don't have the ability to put that in the chat at the moment. But if you look up Italian Medieval Dyeing Manual, The Secret of Colors, I think it should bring you there. I think it should absolutely bring you there. I've definitely shared this digital resource before with my patrons and my channel members. It's one of the perks I offer my patrons and channel members is access to, when I find these digital resources, I share them there first, and sometimes only there. It's just one of the incentives to become a channel member or a patron. But those are definitely the kind of perks, because as I'm going about in my rabbit hole research, whenever I come across a cool resource like that, I always go and share it with my patrons and my channel members. Yeah. Let's see. I've been watching your videos for a minute and I learned so much from you, but I feel so uneducated as of right now. I get nervous to comment. Oh, Brianne, please do not. Okay, everyone. I have imposter syndrome, so I'm not even certain if I consider myself educated, honestly. But don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to be wrong. I'm not afraid to be wrong. I'm wrong all the time. And I'm happy to admit it when I'm wrong, right? Like I'm happy to admit it, because learning is a process. It's a journey. You start from a place of ignorance, and the whole goal is to just get less ignorant over time. Right? So please don't feel shy about asking questions. There are no bad questions as long as they're honest questions. I mean, there are troll questions. I think we all know what I'm talking about there. That's different. That's not what I mean. But there are no questions that I consider too dumb. There are no questions that I consider too ignorant or too basic, right? We all start from somewhere, and all of us start from a place of ignorance the day we're born, right? So yeah, please don't be embarrassed or nervous to comment or ask questions. Please, please, please. Let me see. Did I miss something? Oh, it's okay, Isabella. It's okay for the men to understand that women have certain needs. Let me see. There was a comment there. Oh, did they dress their pets? Yes, dogs. They actually made barding for dogs, just like today, except that it was heraldic. Cats, not so much. Cats were considered I mean, they were a beloved pet also, but they were also a working part of the family. I mean, dogs were as well. But the noblemen especially, and noble women especially, would have their hunting dogs, especially their hunting dogs, dressed in barding, which is the garments for animals, horses usually, but also for dogs. And they were usually heraldic in nature, so you would know whose dog it was. But did they dress their dogs the way we dress our dogs, just because we want to be mean to the dogs and think it's cute? No. It was part of the whole, this dog is part of my household. The dog shall therefore wear my household's colors. And I've only seen evidence of that amongst the real, truly, blue-blooded aristocrats doing that. I haven't necessarily seen evidence of, say, a carpenter. I've seen no evidence of carpenters doing that, I guess is what I should say, with their dogs. Were buttons on string the only things available to hold fabric closed? By buttons on string, what do you mean? So closures included lacing holes, buttons and buttonholes, various kinds of buttons. They also, by the 15th century, we also have hooks and eyes. That seems to be the method of holding things closed. Lacing, hooks and eyes, buttons. And by buttons on strings, what do you mean? Is going to be my question for you. Because if you're talking about the method whereby they're like lace holes and you put a long shafted metal button through and then run a string down the back, that's not the only method of attaching buttons. They definitely attached buttons also directly to the edge of the garment without sticking it through a hole in that string thing. But the buttons were actually affixed were actually put on a thread shaft, basically, so that they would fit through the lace hole, the buttonhole, and that the edges would meet flush. Medieval garments, when they button shut, they didn't overlap like this. They met edge to edge, perfect, so you'd have a perfect silhouette, perfectly flat and flush silhouette. Oh, buttons and strings. Oh, yes. No, no, no. So they're lacing, and buttons. Yeah. They also, by the 15th century, they have hooks and eyes also. I'm hoping the company that sells the necklace you are wearing, will eventually sell the knots separately. Oh, well, you absolutely, I would reach out and I would suggest that to them. I think if they realize that there's a market for that, they would probably do that. Absolutely. So I would actually, Armor and Castings, if you're watching, it's not the first time I've had people request that just the pieces, the individual component knots, actually be sold separately. But I would reach out to them. They're very friendly, and they're always happy to take suggestions on the kind of products people would like to see out there. Oh, you did ask, I guess. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm scroll up to Haley's question. I guess there wasn't Velcro. It's kind of hard for me to scroll too far up. Could you post the question again in the comments? Yeah, Mathieu, could you repost them? The chat is moving so fast. Oh wait, there we go. Okay. I'm 40 and losing my close-up vision for this. Do we assume most seamstresses were younger in the era before glasses? They had the era before glasses would be before the 13th century. So they had spectacles. It's in the 13th century that spectacles are invented for farsightedness. And we know that we were using them for things like writing and sewing. So probably yeah. So tailors, people who did the actual sewing, the seamers and the seamsters, I'm assuming they probably stopped actually doing that work when they lost their close-up vision. But we have spectacles for nearsightedness, for farsightedness, excuse me, starting in the 13th century. So I think a lot of people don't realize that they actually had spectacles in the Middle Ages. And then by the second half of the 15th century is when spectacles for nearsightedness are invented. So yeah, I'm going to assume though that failing the ability to get one's hands on corrective lenses, probably people stopped doing that work at about that age, and maybe find something else to do in order to earn money. Yeah, it's a good question. Yep. It's definitely a good question. And people will say, oh, well, the average age in the Middle Ages was only 40 anyway. Okay, but that's only if you don't control, for infant mortality, right? Let me see. I could make plain wood by hand, but not necessarily drill 100 holes of 3/8 of an inches, 12 feet long, 4 inches by 4 inches. So not everything is fun by hand, but planing half an inch of wood by hand. but planing half an inch of wood by hand, oof, yeah, yeah. So sewing by hand that much. Yeah, it's just the long seams just get boring, you know what I mean? The long seams just get boring is what it is, because it's just either a running stitch or a back stitch or a running back stitch, and it just gets boring after not very long, in fact. I will openly admit. Yep, I agree with you, Jim. We learn from a place of ignorance. Ignorance is not a dirty word. Exactly. Exactly. Ignorance is simply our natural state, and it's one that I hope to spend my whole life rectifying. Yep. Okay, sorry. There was not Velcro. That is correct. Swan, thank you. Please come back. I hope to see you again. You asked some excellent questions. I have learned how to do null bind. Do I do knitting? I have learned how to do null binding, which is basically single needle knitting. I have never learned to do two needle knitting, not because I'm not necessarily interested, but because it's not. Yeah, there's so many other things I want to do also. There's only my lifespan is limited, and there's so many handcrafts that I enjoy already. I don't need to add yet another handcraft technique to my textile technique to my arsenal. But knitting in the Middle Ages is an interestingly controversial topic because nail binding, single needle knitting, is very prevalent in throughout the Middle Ages, up into even the 15th century in Scandinavia. Somewhere in the ancient Roman Empire, specifically in Egypt, they seem to have developed two needle knitting, and that technique sticks around for a while, but it's really limited to that part of the world. It seems that maybe the Moors brought it into Spain. For certain, they brought it into Spain because then in Spain, from the 13th century, 12th, 13th, and 14th century, we have a whole host of knitted goods, knitted pillowcases, knitted hats, not so much knitted stockings, though, interestingly, in Spain. And then we have knitted pouches also throughout by the 14th century in most of Europe. And then by the 16th century, they start knitting stockings. But before that, it just seems not many garments were actually knitted. And I don't know why. I don't know why it's not until the 16th century that it really starts taking off big time. Oh, thank you, Jim. Well, I'm very happy to remind you of a dear friend, someone who was creative and who explored natural dyeing. I really enjoy natural dyeing. I love, I love chemistry. I love hands-on chemistry, and dyeing and cooking are two forms of hands-on creative chemistry. So working with dye stuffs is absolutely fascinating, and the same kind of effects you can get in the kitchen as well. Just really interesting stuff. And tonight's medieval cooking show, we will definitely be talking about food chemistry. So I'm not just an artsy fartsy type. I enjoy the science as well. So we will be talking about the science behind what we are doing as we are doing it, because there's a lot of science. Well, there's some very specific, in tonight's thing, there's kind of a couple of variations on a theme of science, but still, yeah, very excited. Okay, yeah. So let's see. What else did I read about? There's some other things I picked up in the news that were the historical news that were of big interest. For those who don't know, I have my medieval live stream with Philip from Irish Medieval History, The Medieval Buzz. We will, pooh, that's not good. Oh dear, did I just sew that in? No, I didn't. Yay. Okay. I have my show, my weekly live stream now, The Medieval Buzz with Philip from Irish Medieval History. That will be Monday evening Americas, middle of the night or super early morning Europe, and Tuesday morning in Asia, Tuesday morning and after midday in Asia. So we will be talking about the latest developments in the medieval world and chatting and answering your questions and generally sharing our love and enthusiasm for medieval material culture and medieval history in general. I'm more of the material culture person. Philip is more of a classic historian, but I'm trying to get him more into the material culture side of things too. Let me see. Oh yeah, the Maillard. Yeah, Machu. I like the Maillard reaction when cooking meat. The Maillard reaction is so crucial. Absolutely. The way those amino acids just turn to sugars. Yum, yum, yum. Was owning a sword as common as it is in the movies? It was amongst the aristocracy, yes, and maybe more so. Did peasants own swords? No, in the 15th century. Now, they were likely they could have a weapon called a falchion, which is like if a sword and a knife had a baby, right? That's a falchion. They could have one, but is everyone of all social classes running around with swords in the 15th century? Absolutely not. And that's why certain weapons become very prevalent in the 15th century as peasants start taking up arms. Basically, farm implements get upcycled into weapons. Bill hooks, glaives, right? These are all originally, in Europe anyway, they're farming implements. So yeah, owning a sword is definitely not as common as people would. And honestly, to use a sword competently, to actually succeed in using it as a real weapon against an opponent, you need to be trained. You can't just pick up a sword and hope you're going to win. It's not going to happen. You're going to die. You will be slaughtered. Yeah. Oh, a bullock knife. Yeah, bullock knives are fun. They really are. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, just checking the chat. Yeah, so no, sword, it was not so common as, I mean, it depends on this movie, I guess, or the show, but certainly a large subset of medieval society did not own a sword in the 15th century across Europe. That is true. It's, yeah. But that being said, it seems to be becoming more common. And by the 16th century, you have, in the 15th century, you start to see the rise of swords schools for swordsmanship, what some people call fencing schools, but I don't like to use that word because it creates the absolutely wrong image. 15th century sword fighting, fencing is, I mean, you could barely even know it's related at all to modern collegiate fencing, for instance. Like not even even in the same plane of existence. So that's why I really don't like to use the word fencing when I refer to historical pre-modern combat, because I think it conjures absolutely the wrong image. Now, the word fencing is a corruption of the word defense, as in the art of defense, which is what that kind of swordsmanship was called in the 16th century. And the medieval English fighting manuals, I can't think offhand of any Middle English fighting manuals. That doesn't mean there aren't any. I just can't think of any offhand, is all I like to say. I definitely focus more on France and Italy in my research endeavors. So I know more about sources in other languages than I do about the English sources of, say, fighting or fencing. But there's still, nevertheless, there is an increase of schools that teach sword fighting as the 15th century wears on. And then by the end of the 16th century, fencing schools seem to be everywhere. They seem to be omnipresent. Yeah. Wheat flogs and wooden pitchforks are probably more common. Yeah, wheat flogs become, what is it that wheat flogs grow into in terms of weapons that peasants use to win the various peasants' wars in the 16th century? Yeah, I would agree with that, Vendetta. Baby, careful, don't forget your sword and ride safe. Yeah, right. Yeah, and I mean, yeah, so falchion, yeah, I've heard different things from different people about falchions. Weapons are not my area of expertise, but yeah, most peasants are going to be using upcycled, as far as I can tell, based on the visual records anyway. Most peasants are using upcycled farming implements. And that's not because they're poor. That's not what I mean at all. Peasant does not equal poor. Peasant does not equal poverty. I would like to say, peasants could actually be quite well off. They were farmers, though. They were farmers, and some peasants owned land, actually. Peasant, paysan, is from the French word paysan, peasant, paysan, farmer. So that it's not about their it's not about their economic status. It's about their profession, actually. And so, peasants could indeed be quite well off, and they could hypothetically afford, say, a nice sword. Some of them could, absolutely. But you would still need the training to use it. You can't just swing a sword and hope that you win. It's just not going to happen. Let me see. Okay, there we go. Medieval fencing was in the round as opposed to collegiate fencing. Yeah, in line. I mean, medieval fencing, not just that, it was full body, not just in the round. Not just in the round. 15th century one-on-one combat involving swords and other weapons was full body. It was total body. Grappling absolutely came into it. Weapon grabbing, throws. It was basically like BJ, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gets a weapon. Like it's yeah, it was not just in the round. It was a total body experience. And I think when people imagine fencing, they definitely don't imagine grabbing weapons, using weapons to throw people to the ground, hilt bashing, kicking in the groin, kicking in the face, kicking in the teeth. I mean, they don't imagine the amount of punching and kicking that seems to have gone into a lot of sword fighting in the 15th century based on what the manuals teach people to do at any rate. So yeah, and fencing definitely does not conjure those images. Fencing in the round actually conjures like the Three Musketeers, and that's definitely not what they're doing in the 15th century either. The sword is, yeah. The sword is used as much for its leverage point as for the blade itself in many cases, at least in the 15th century. No, some peasants own land. They did. They were called yeomen, actually. Usually, if they were landowning peasants in English, they were called yeomen, I believe. Yep. Was peasant really used as an insult? So when you say was it used as an insult, when? So the word vilain in French, from which we get the word villain, also used to mean someone who lived in the country, right? That's where vilain comes from. And eventually that began to have through literature actually, began to have the connotations of someone who was crude and mean in the older meaning of that term. And then eventually it became a synonym for the bad guy in the story, right? So it's kind of a devolution of the term. Peasant, I'm not certain about, right? I'm not certain about peasant. When peasant became a term that you would use in an insulting way, that you might use against someone who wasn't a peasant and therefore meant to be insulting, versus just telling someone peasant, get out of the way. That's not an insult. That's just calling what they are, implying that you're higher ranking than they are. So it's not the same as an insult. Yeah. I mean, Jim, absolutely. I get you're being simplistic. I'm just filling in the blanks there for people who might not know better, right? A lot of people who haven't actually seen reconstructions of, pre 1500 combat generally have the wrong idea, because Hollywood has not necessarily done us any favors in that regard. Yeah, I totally understand you were being purposefully simplistic, and I get that, and I totally appreciate that. But the whole point is for me to fill in those blanks. It's one of the reasons people like watching this stream. Yeah. Yep. So let's see. Did I miss any questions? Sometimes the chat moves really fast. Thankfully, it's not moving as quickly today, and I don't know why. Civilian equals no. Civilian equals villain, I thought. Bad lighting, it looks yellow. Yeah, so unfortunately it's very overcast right now, and because I've had to position myself where I am because of certain realities of where I can actually hang this tapestry. Yeah, the lighting isn't super wonderful in here at the moment. Yeah, I'm kind of limited into where I can actually set up in my current circumstances, shall we say. Okay, I think I may have actually, one little spot left. Cameo necklaces. Cameos are an interesting thing because they are a revival in starting in about the 14th century. The Italians start rediscovering a lot of the ancient Roman material culture, and they actually start collecting ancient Roman items. And so it seems that it's very likely that the art of cameo making actually may have died away for multiple centuries and been revived starting in about the 14th or 15th century. In any case, the fashion for cameos is absolutely revived starting in the 14th century, because the various Italians start taking an interest in their ancient Roman heritage, thanks to Petrarca's very intentional directing of that, by the way. And these, Italian men and nobles and patricians start collecting ancient Roman items, including cameos. And so they actually start wearing them again in the 15th century. They start wearing cameos again. But there seems to be this gap in Western Europe anyway, between where they were worn and not worn. There's a very long period where we don't have evidence of cameos being worn in Western Europe. I'm not certain about Constantinople. Don't ask me about Constantinople. Cats will be cats. You're back. Yeah, I know. My lives have really taken off. Yeah, there's my lives have definitely taken off big time. Oh, cool. Nevis, chime in about cameos as much as you want. Oh, you think my camera front may need to be cleaned? Okay, let's see what happens here. Okay, that might help. That might help some, but it could also just be like the light in here is yellow. Everything has a yellow hue to it. Everything has a yellow hue. So it's just the light. The light is just it just seems to be yellow. Let's see. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I know. It's the live streams have really grown, but going to vertical live streaming is what has really driven it because YouTube is really pushing vertical live streams right now. YouTube is barely pushing horizontal live streams at all. The difference between when I do vertical live streaming and horizontal is exponential, orders of magnitude. Yep. Yeah, thank you, Cats Will Be Cats. Appreciate the congrats. Let's see. Hollywood is terrible for sword fighting. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty in some cases anyway, and sometimes brutal, but not accurate. Yeah. Did they use string as an alternative to a chain for necklace? Absolutely. Silk. They definitely frequently used silk strings as an alternative for necklace chains. You can see this in a lot of, you can see this especially in Italy, in the Italies, in the 15th century in Italy's, in the portraits. If you look, you can actually see that the cameos are often suspended. Cameos and pendants are often suspended on some kind of string. And I will bet you dollars to donuts that it's a nice silk string. Yep, definitely. Um, the camera was dirty. Okay. Not surprising. I'm pretty mean to my devices. I'm mean in the sense of I travel a lot with them and things end up on them anyway. Yeah. Not surprising. So is anyone working on anything at the moment? Any projects that you have ongoing? Nevis, are you working on anything? Are you still working on your pieces, your talismanic pieces, or are they getting all finished up finally? Let's see. Jim Looper says, I'm going to YouTube for my medieval blacksmithing format from now on. Thank you for the inspiration. Have fun, make stuff. Exactly. Have fun, make stuff. And everyone, I have a couple of polished video essays on the docket that I've already started that I will finish up. But honestly, I'm moving mostly to a live stream format until the algorithm starts rewarding some other form of content because my very carefully researched, carefully scripted, carefully edited, carefully filmed videos on a specific topic get almost no views relative to the amount of effort I put into them. The market is just oversaturated with them. So my live streaming seems to be really popular. Everyone seems to enjoy the format and getting creative together and learning things together in this casual format. So after this, I think I maybe have 4 videos left on my docket, but otherwise I'm definitely probably getting out of the polished video business until something changes. Now, if you all would like to go fund me, because honestly, the amount of time and effort that one of my polished videos, say the video on medieval women's underwear, I spent dozens, if not hundreds of hours just doing the research for that video, let alone the scripting, the filming, the editing, the post-processing, right? That was, so, I mean, hundreds of hours for a 15 to 20-minute video. I think that one is 32 minutes, parts 1 and 2, right? Hundreds of hours. And I mean, I think it's earned me maybe, even if I include my patrons who supported that one, that's maybe earned me $300 in the last several years. So it's just not worth it to do the fine polished videos for channels of my size. I just don't get the financial, it's not worth the amount of effort I have to put into it. Now, if you all would like to go fund me making some kind of, or maybe kickstart me making a polished video on a specific topic again, we can definitely look at that as an option. But otherwise, end up spending way too much time, making the video rather than making the things that I want to be making and sharing with you. So I am moving definitely towards much more of a live stream only format until YouTube decides that it wants to reward some other kind of content. We'll see. But right now, for small creators like me, it's just not rewarding the polished videos at all. If you look at the views on my getting dressed videos or my project vlogs and how long they've been out there and available, it's just not worth it. Yeah. Let's see. Nevis says going to be mass producing Mars and Scorpio talismans this month. Planning to continue on my fan when Venus enters Libra, and awaiting a response on the Exalted Jupiter collaboration. Oh, is that the collaboration with you wanted to do with Historical Glassworks? I really hope that comes to fruition. I really hope that comes to fruition. Ooh, working on Merovingian hair clips. Very cool. Which kinds of Merovingian hair clips? So I lived in Europe for a long time, and of course, every single local museum has lots of Merovingian finds, at least in where I was. There was lots of Merovingian finds. So what kind of hair clips are you working on? When you say hair clips, what do you mean? Because I'm thinking about Merovingian hair, of Merovingian bling, and I can't think of anything that's a hair clip. Are you talking about a hair stick, maybe? I'll be interested to know what you're talking about, because that sounds really cool. Let's see, just scrolling back. If the Tudor era had Anne Boleyn, the Rococo era had Marie Antoinette. Yeah, I actually think that Marie Antoinette maybe doesn't get enough credit, honestly. Yeah. Let me see. Shepherd's pie is my favorite dish. Shepherd's pie. Yeah. So, what kind of shepherd's pie, Isabella? Like, because I've actually seen several different basic recipes now. Of course, in America, in the United States, it's almost never made the way shepherd's pie should be, which is with lamb, because that's why it's the shepherd, because of the lamb mincemeat that's supposed to go into it. Most Americans make it with beef, of course. It's America. Beef. It's what's for dinner. But yeah, and in America, a lot of people put tomato sauce and corn in it, actually. I don't like that version of shepherd's pie. I like the more traditional version, which is a mince made of lamb and celery and carrots and some green herbs, and then that's put down, and onions, and then topped with a yummy creamy mashed potato topping. That's my preferred version of shepherd's pie. I'm always interested how different people have different interpretations of these sort of what is actually peasant food, really, if you think about it. The wand consecration is tomorrow. Oh, that's super cool. I love how, let's see, going on here. Was gut string used for anything besides musical instruments? That's a good question. I think gut string there's a possibility that it was used also as a utilitarian, like the way we would use sinew now, maybe. But I don't know. I have no confirmation of that. Honestly, gut string is so hard to produce, and would have been so expensive, probably. Intestines are obviously plentifully available in the Middle Ages. That's not the issue. The issue is that the process of making gut string by hand is laborious and time intensive. So I would imagine that it would have been too expensive to use for more utility things where there would be lots of wear and tear. So I don't know. Does anyone know, is gut string ever used for anything other than instruments in the Middle Ages? That's an interesting question. I ate the crust of shepherd's pie. I wasn't supposed to eat the crust, apparently. Wait, Vendetta? What is the crust? The shepherd's pie I know doesn't have a crust, so now I'm super curious. Check the link I shared for the hair clips. Oh, Jim, unfortunately, stupid Facebook, because of all those awful trolls that were posting really unwanted links, YouTube blocks the links. It won't let you post links. Darn it. Um, oh, darn it. Yeah, that's really. I'm trying to think of an alternate way you could get me those links. If you find me on Facebook or Instagram, you can message me there. And if you want, you don't have to. Don't feel you have to. But if you would like to share those links with me, find me the Creative Contessa on Facebook or on Instagram, and you can message me the links there. Yeah. I was thinking maybe it was used for archery. Oh, bowstrings. Oh, bowstrings. The bowstrings I know of, now I'm not an expert, but I will tell you that bowstrings excavated in Cork in Ireland were made of silk. Very composite, like carefully very sophisticated method of silk, making it of silk string. It wasn't just like plain old silk thread. It was actually a string, a properly made string, but it was made of silk. Yeah. Okay, then we have here in Quebec, it's called pâté chinois. Really? Pâté chinois is shepherd's pie? Interesting. Okay. uh, yeah, maybe. Huh. That's an interesting thought. Okay. Well, it looks like I have finished resoling this stocking, and I will show you in a moment. I might have to redo the toe area because I ended up wrapping up around the toe. We'll see how this feels when I put it in my shoe. Okay, so here is the resoled stocking, right? And as I said, it ended up wrapping up a little bit up and around the top of the toe. Now, my toenails are vile and will eat through anything. So as long as it's comfortable, it'll be fine. And I will probably appreciate that. So I'll have to try it on, put it on, and put the shoe on and see how it feels. But yeah, so now it's all resoled. And so hopefully this fustian, which is heavier than the linen out of which the original stocking was made, will last a goodly long while before my evil, vile feet dance through it again. Oh, shattered iron. Thank you. This is a replica of Maria Portinari's collar, a 15th century collar, so like 1470s-ish, 1470s. Maria Portinari, it's a replica made by Armour and Castings, ARMOUR and Castings. Yeah, you can purchase it from their website, armourandcastings.com. Contessa 10 for a 10% discount. Why do people call it catgut strings? Even though it's not, yeah, I'm not certain why it's called catgut, honestly. I think I read once upon a time where that etymology came from. It's just gut string, honestly. Yeah, my toenails, I need to see a specialist about my toenails, honestly. Ground beef, corn, and potatoes. Okay, there it is, the American version. Ground beef, corn, and potatoes. Yep, it's pâté chinois. Nice, interesting. I learned something about Quebecois food. Was also used on other armor shoe works. I mean, I assumed it might be. I wasn't certain. I've never seen primary source evidence talking about other uses for gut string. Jim, do you have any extant pieces you know of where specifically the gut string is still intact? That'd be really interesting. Now I've got to go back to Leeds and talk to the Leeds armory curator and see if they can point out to me where they have gut string in their collection. Let me see. Okay. Maria Portinari, no, she was Florentine. Maria Portinari was Florentine, and she was actually Maria Baroncelli at first, Maria Portinari, née Baroncelli. So Maria Baroncelli married Tommaso Portinari and then moved from Florence to Bruges. So this is one of those instances where I say, if you are Florentine, it is possible that you would actually have Burgundian fashions in your wardrobe, because you probably use a chance you were seconded to one of the branches of the banks or the merchant offices up there in the Low Countries in Flanders, and then you would have both your Florentine fashions plus your Burgundian fashions. So me being a Florentine of origin but having Burgundian fashions is authentic, in fact. Haha. Let me see. I couldn't find the book you were talking about, but I bought Mappe Clavicula and yeah, De Diversis Artibus. Yes, absolutely. A good choice. Definitely a good choice. I segreti per colore. Darn it. I'll see if I can find the link and post it in my community, on my various community walls. No, it's cool, Jim. I'm always curious. Like I'm a primary source girl. I love to get back to the primary source evidence as much as possible. Yeah. And what were the strings of, oh, medieval instruments were made from gut string, usually sheep gut, often sheep gut. And if you want to see how gut string is made, the Green Valley is a series that is actually set in the early 17th century. It's on a 17th century Stuart era farm that is worked like it is the 17th century. And they actually make gut string from scratch. And I think it's actually one on Tony Robbins, Tony Robinson's The Worst Jobs in History, Stuart era. He actually goes and helps make gut string from slaughtering the sheep all the way through to the end. So if you want to see how gut string is made, Green Valley, but also Tony Robinson's Worst Jobs in History, Stuart edition. So yeah, they were made from gut. And first you had to milk the guts, and that sounds just as horrifying as you think it is. And then you had to, soak them and wash them. And then eventually you actually have to twist them. And you twist them around each other using a twister, and that's what makes it string-like. And then it dries. Yeah. Yeah, gut strings have a more, gut strings have a more profound sound to them, in my opinion. Metal strings have a much sharper sound, right? Much more. And I know some of you out there who are big violin fans and want your violins to have metal strings are probably hating me, but yeah, I think I prefer the sound of gut strings too. Gut strings, though, require constant retuning if your environment is not steady. Yeah, Tony Robinson. Yep, worst jobs in history. Absolutely. Okay, everyone. Well, I have been streaming now for 3.5 hours, and I have to save some energy for our medieval cooking show tonight. Also, I need to eat lunch. So, medieval cooking show will be taking place in 6 hours, so 5 hours. I can do math. 5 hours and 40 minutes. In 5 hours and 40 minutes, we will be doing our medieval cooking stream live show. We will be making zabaglione, a lovely wine egg custard, and the less appealing sounding larded milk. So if you want to see exactly what larded milk is and work through an original 15th century recipe with me, then come back in 5 hours and 40 minutes, the Creative Contessa, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for joining today. I'd like to thank you for this fantastic live stream participation. Your questions have been great. Your comments have been great. I've really appreciated all of you new members of my court, veteran members of my court. I would once more like to thank Armor and Castings for being a channel sponsor. I would like to thank my patrons on Patreon and my channel members for going the next level and supporting me financially in my work. I'd like to thank all of you who maybe don't have the extra funds, but take the time to leave comments, hit the thumbs up, leave an emoji, and participate in my live stream chats. We've all been building this beautiful creative community together, and I hope to keep it going for a long time to come, everyone. Until later, may your adventures be creative, everyone, and I hope to see you for some cooking fun this evening. Bye, everyone.